I'm here in the campaign setup menu for Rome Total War Remastered, where I have cunningly disabled the population mechanic rework that comes with the remaster. That's going to come in very useful in what I'm bringing you here today, the logs of my no attacking Rome Total War challenge run, playing as Greek cities for certain reasons to be discussed later. The goal of this challenge is to win the game without ever giving an attack order, in battle or on the campaign map, with about 50 caveats to that rule, which we'll see as we go along. Before I begin, I need to perform one extra setup step. Cheating, sort of. Anyway, what I'm doing is editing the game files so that the Greek cities don't have any walls. This sounds like a reverse cheat, but it does make the game easier in the scenario where you can't attack, because if you're familiar with this game, you might know any unit in the game can take any settlement for free via a siege. Normally, you could attack that unit and stop the siege, but not in this challenge, and I learned the hard way in my preparation that while the AI usually doesn't use this technique, it can do, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. So my first recourse there was having no walls, as the AI will treat unwalled towns as field battles. I can't arrange this in-game because walls can't be deleted, by the way, which most buildings can. And were I to capture a place with walls, I would be stuck with them, wouldn't I? However, there is another way to get around being sieged. In fact, there's a couple of ways which we'll get to. Now, you've probably noticed that the Romans are coming for us in Sicily. Thanks to the usual stone walls being gone, they can just rush in and go for a capture whenever they like. What are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to hang around and ensure that we never cast the first stone, so to speak. This is a pacifist run in a world of total war, which in practice just means that while we'll have to fight, I will never order my troops to do so. All fighting will always be the enemy's prerogative. However, since the fighting is inevitable, we need to still be able to win, and win with basically no tactics, since as you might guess, many strategies in a real-time strategy game do require you to attack the enemy. And that's where the magic of Greeks, and in particular hoplites, comes in. Hoplites can attack enemies outside of the usual melee range if they're in front of them, making them ideal for battles where everyone is standing still, settlement defense battles in particular, as their main weakness, being outflanked, doesn't really come up much in town streets. Therefore, the grand plan for the entire campaign, at first at least, is basically to put some hoplites in all my towns so that I'll be invincible, kill anyone who shows up, and then, thanks to the use of the classic population mechanics, this will actively drain our opponents of manpower, making every kill really count in the long term. To explain that more fully, the old school population mechanic makes it so that when you recruit a unit on a high unit size, it subtracts the full population amount from the settlement. In the remaster, it was changed so that the amount lost is balanced equally across all the unit size settings. So I've combined this old school mode with the highest unit size to mean that an average early game settlement can only produce like 2,000 men, so that's like 10 units, before it stagnates and becomes useless. Therefore, I can massively damage my enemies purely by defending, and I can defend purely by standing still using hoplites. Yes, as you might be catching on, a large part of this strategy is tricking the enemy factions into unaliving their entire population, so that I will get relatively stronger than them at the negotiating table without ever doing anything. It's only that this process, which I thought would be like quick and easy and this would be a short video, totally doesn't work like I thought it was going to. Indeed, hoplites don't really function as the all-powerful frontal assault units that I wanted, or even remembered from the good old days. Maybe it's a remaster change, this. The reason is hoplites don't stun or knock back their enemies when they strike. This means if the enemy is closing to melee range, and the first, couple of spear thrusts don't kill them, then a proper melee starts, and the phalanx loses its special ability, becoming a regular sword and shield unit instead. This mixes with a unique thing about the old Total Wars, mass and momentum. If a small phalanx is attacked by a large blob of just about anything, there is this pushing effect that slides the enemy blob towards you and forces a regular melee. If you're not killing them fast enough, that is. Not to mention cavalry. While hoplites have a bonus against cavalry, a frontal charge can break through even a pike phalanx, at least in the remaster, because the bonus gets removed once regular melee begins. Therefore, if a couple of horses in the unit don't instantly die on the first spear attack, they'll move through the spear and start a sword fight, and after that, the below average stats of hoplites outside of phalanx mode means that a single unit of, say, General's Bodyguard, with armor and 2 hit points so they can clip through spears without dying, can handily wipe out entire units of hoplites, even when frontally charging into a spear wall down a street, as I've learned the hard way many times. So in my original formulation of this challenge, I was going to play as Macedon, because with them you get phalangites. The theory there would have been that you have more layers of spears, so it's more likely, or less likely, for a regular melee to start. This comes with 2 disadvantages though. Firstly, phalangites generally have lower stats than hoplites, so the risk from regular fighting is greater. Secondly, Macedon is just a worse faction than the Greek cities. They start with fewer cities, less income, and fewer buildings, and the start conditions do matter a lot in this challenge, as the Rome Remastered campaign AI is extremely aggressive against the player particularly, even on the lowest difficulty, so you can expect to be attacked by 1 or 2 factions at least right away, especially seafaring Romans like the Brutii, who are happy to just sail across the map and kill you wherever you are. As soon as the enemy's starting armies can attack you, essentially, they will, so you've got about as much time as it takes them to walk towards you. That makes this challenge really difficult to pull off as Macedon, because you won't have time to make a pike army or anything like that. Macedon can't recruit anything other than levy pikes for a long time, and I don't even think they can recruit levy pikes in the first turn. It takes a while to get even those. Their generic pike unit, called like city pikes, something like that, is a tier 4 unit, meaning you have to wait for cities to level up before you can get it, which takes forever. I tried many times, sometimes actually getting a few of these things out, but I never had enough wealth or security to really deploy them everywhere and get a stable foothold. That led me back to the Greek cities. They were one of the factions that often attacked me as Macedon, and I noticed they were spamming a unit known simply as Armoured Hoplites. Armoured Hoplites are wild. Any unit with armour can defeat most pike units if they don't die in one hit, as I said. But these guys are also really good at general purpose fighting, as they have an insanely high armour stat, which removes their classic weakness to ranged attacks, and their OK melee attack means they can hack through stuff good enough outside of phalanx mode. And the icing on the cake is that they are barely more expensive to build and upkeep than regular hoplites, despite having vastly higher stats, and they can be built at tier 3. As the Greek cities start with good settlements, you can either build these like in the first turn, or you're 1 barracks upgrade away from being able to get them in the first turn, so you can get them on like the 4th or 5th turn. And in the meantime, you still have the tier 2 regular hoplites, which the Macedonians don't get anything like. And they'll be fine as long as nothing armoured gets too enthusiastic about attacking them. Therefore, the Greek cities are really well suited to quickly making an army that doesn't require any attack orders to succeed in battle. But of course there's even more to it than that, and even armoured hoplites will lose in regular melee to the likes of principes or heavy cavalry, and the lesser hoplites are easily killed by javelins and arrows even when lodged in city streets, thanks to low armour and surprisingly low shield stats given how famous they were for shield walls. But after millions of experiments, I managed to get battle setups that will extremely reliably make the AI not do the various strategies that can defeat a static block of hoplites. That's where the real power comes in, and we'll probably talk later about the original strategy I thought would emerge from all this before I realised how important the mass unaliving of the entire map would actually be. It's been quite a journey, and as I record this I haven't finished it yet, so I'm not sure how it will end. However, I strongly believe that it is entirely possible to complete a campaign without ever giving an attack order. And if you're interested in such an enormous waste of time, allow me to summarise how my quest went in the rest of this video. Not sorry in advance if this turns out to be extremely long. Welcome to Rome Total Peace, the No Attacking Challenge, / Kill 'em All World Depopulation Pacifist Challenge, / Guy who wanted to find a way to play Rome Total War while AFK gets more than he bargained for. Let's dive into the madness for a bit. We were thrust or pulled into various wars right away, including against this opponent here, Pontus, who regularly attacked Pergamon. I was excited to see some high-ranking generals here because there is one possible strategy where you kill all of a faction's ruling family and generals. This turns their settlements into rebel territory who won't attack you. We're going to see this happen a bit, but it's very hard to pull off, as I believe the game is scripted in some way to make this not happen. If I recall, the enemy will spawn a new family member when they get down to one remaining. So they always have two, basically. You have to get them down to the last two, and then kill those two in the same turn, to actually kill the faction via this method, and whether this is possible will be pure luck, essentially, and usually won't happen, as the AI likes to leave a governor somewhere in their territory, often their faction leader. That aside, defending against Pontus should be easy, because they spam low-quality units that regular hoplites will easily defeat. However, they do have the Eastern General unit, which is easily good enough to obliterate hoplites from the front, as previously mentioned. This creates an opening for their massed infantry to get into our formation, and things don't go all that well here. All I can do is move troops around a bit so their general will have to fight more and more hoplites, such that he will eventually be killed. But yes, the Eastern General has great stats, being basically cataphracts, and later on we'll see the armoured variant, which is shockingly hard to kill, even with a spear wall. A problem for another day. For now, we're seeing the importance of getting away from hoplites and towards armoured hoplites. You need units that can survive being in regular melee. The whole phalanx exploit in city streets thing isn't guaranteed to last, and it's not even guaranteed to happen at all, especially if the enemy lead their attack with a heavy unit. We won that battle thanks to the enemy king dying, but it wasn't pretty. Meanwhile, over in Greece, we're fighting the Green Romans, who in theory will be harder to defeat, since their units all have more armour. The Roman infantry is the best in the game, broadly speaking. A vague way of thinking about it is that whatever the Romans build from, say, a level 3 barracks will have the stat lines of something the other factions get from a level 4 barracks, but without extra cost, so Rome is just generally very good. However, in Greece, as mentioned before, we have early access to armoured hoplites, who in terms of stats are most similar to things like Legionary Cohort and Praetorian Cohort, the endgame Roman units. Combined with the Romans being so desperate to attack, they've spammed Town Watch and Dogs, we'll be absolutely fine here. You might have seen one of my units breaking formation earlier and chasing after a routing enemy. Ordinarily, our old pal Guard Mode would prevent this, but there is a catch. It doesn't work. Well, it doesn't always work. I don't know if this is a remaster thing, but you can't fire and forget a phalanx defense plan. As there is a non-zero chance, the units will just break formation of their own volition and walk off, even on guard mode. Therefore, I need to babysit the front lines, and when we're being attacked in more than one place, I need to look back and forth between them and try to quickly bring units back in as they walk off. I would say this happens in roughly 1 in 3 battles, and occasionally it leads to disasters like the whole unit dying. So that's helpful. It seems there are like non-pacifists in our ranks who are secretly distributing attack orders to our men. These violent temptations will be yet another enemy to face on our quest here, thanks to what I presume is a glitch. You'll see here I actually do give out some attack orders, despite my peaceful overtures. This is the first of the set of caveats to the rules I made during my initial experiments as Macedon, due to things getting really annoying in certain circumstances. The rule here is that I allow myself to chase routing units if the end battle thing has already come up, taking the fight into the rout phase. The goal is to get the enemy force below 20% of its starting strength. Then you can click exit battle in the menu and leave it at that. What this does is make the army that attacked you get deleted, I think anyway. I'm fairly sure this rule I'm remembering is actually from medieval Total War, but maybe it applies here. The point is, if you don't kill everything, or up to 80% of the force, the enemy will gradually accumulate these half-dead or nearly dead units, which can either attack you again, which is ultra annoying, or it will use them more often to fill out other armies, which makes their armies weaker due to it like wasting the unit cap with like 3 dog handlers or something. This is annoying to fight because they take just as long to walk towards you in battle as a full unit. You just gotta wait for them to come over with their ballista crew and eventually get them killed. And because it causes you to face fewer enemies overall, it means less killing, which means less pacifism. You might be thinking that doesn't make sense. Well, such is the nature of the kill 'em all pacifist run. Essentially, I attack the enemies after the battles end because it makes the overall campaign faster and the battles bigger and more interesting based on lessons learned from not doing this in the earlier attempts. As a side note, in my original formulation, I wanted to have the rule be that I'm not allowed to give any orders at all, so I can't move either. But the aforementioned guard mode glitch means like this just doesn't work. Plus, being able to move on the campaign map does make things much more interesting, as we'll see. Another random thing to note here on the subject of rules is that I do allow units to be on fire at will, which in many ways isn't a very pacifist thing to do. I just consider that to be like the equivalent of standing your ground allowances for violence when it comes to ranged units. So like the enemy still have the option of not walking into my bow range, just as they have the option of not walking into spear range for the melee guys. Trespassers will be shot, survivors will be deleted from existence by the 20% rule. I don't want to kill you, you have to want to be killed. That's the rule here in our genocidally peaceful vision of Greece. So you could call that another caveat where I'm automatically breaking my own rules by allowing archers to just do whatever they want, including kill people. Hopefully, during my rant you also noticed the power of armoured hoplites. There was a fight there where we saw them facing off against unit after unit, occasionally losing a guy or two, but they are nearly invincible in the early game. And the fact you can get them so early in the game is part of the delightfully outrageous balancing that makes Greek cities so nice for this challenge. Now, if you're wondering what all these contextless battles I'm showing you are, here's the answer. It doesn't really matter. Essentially, because I'm doing absolutely nothing on the campaign map, the only action is when I get attacked. Which is all the time, but then, since I'm doing absolutely nothing in the battles for the most part, actually still almost following this no orders challenge I originally had in mind, all that matters for now is that I check the fights to try and get a clear idea of what units can potentially beat armoured hoplites. All the maps we fight on will be pretty much the same, usually exactly the same actually because of how these city layouts work. The armies I use will be pretty much the same, and the tactics I use will be pretty much the same. So where and why these fights I've been showing so far are happening is irrelevant, so don't worry about that. This truly is a mightily boring challenge run, isn't it? Well, we'll get into more of the antics and more of the details about how what I'm doing here is actually working a bit more cleverly than it looks later, if we're very lucky. I was thinking about that fire at will rule as well. I was kind of thinking that having fire at will turned off would be better here really, or just disband all the ranged units in fact. The good news is that I never actually recruited any ranged units for this campaign because they're so useless generally speaking, so the only ones you'll see me using are the ones I start with in certain towns here and there, or sometimes ones I get through deals later on. In my experience, having ranged troops doesn't really make any significant difference because while they sometimes kill enemies, once there's a melee, they'll just fire at the melee and shoot the back of your phalanx, which can kill them. So you're probably taking losses, and of course you're paying money to upkeep them, that's the big thing. So they're almost certainly not worth having. So it could be argued I've made the challenge harder by keeping archers around here and there, but it's also like, well, they are kind of attacking the enemy. You've sort of ordered them to attack the enemy because you let them attack whoever they want, like go out of their way to attack people to some extent. I don't really know here. It might be making the campaign a bit harder, it might be undermining the peace rule. I think that, in retrospect, the fire at will thing shouldn't have been allowed, so there you go. I've got this idea, guys, for a new, more peaceful world. What if we don't automatically shoot everybody we see? Well, I guess I'll have a think about that. In this battle against Pontus, I was checking out how chariots would do against hoplites, and we learn they do very badly. There's this charge reflection mechanic looking thing that I vaguely remember applies to everything in the original. I don't know if that's just like blood-tinted glasses at play. The thing that happens to chariots and elephants when they hit hoplite phalanxes and just explode and die instantly with no chance for anything else to happen is what I thought would happen at least also to cavalry. But I don't know, it doesn't work like that. I've never seen a chariot move through a phalanx in the way that horses can, despite their massive momentum. There is supposed to be some kind of damage reflection system with a phalanx. I even vaguely remember from really back in the day that a hoplite phalanx's damage reflection applies in all directions. It's not linked to the direction of the spear wall. So if they're in phalanx formation, I think a cavalry charge to the rear can also do a damage reflection effect and kill some of the cavalry. I might be making that up completely or confusing it with a different game. Well, you let me know in the comments, just more hashtag #OffEDLies for you right here. I don't think that ever applied to infantry attacks. Or, well, maybe it didn't apply to any attacks, I don't know. The point is, I want everybody who so much as looks at my hoplites from any angle to die instantly. Wah! My overpowered setup isn't overpowered enough. Wah! I want to go make dinner while the world depopulates, which will be the title of my new middle-aged emo math rock doomer album coming very soon. What we're going to do right now is something very special, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to make some progress in the campaign. It's finally happening. To win, we'll need to possess a certain number of regions. We'll get into the details of the victory conditions later. One way to get them is to negotiate for them when the enemy comes crawling in to ask us to stop killing them. Again, pacifist run. So, with the peace treaty region trades, we can gain territory such as Nicomedia right here. A lot of the time though, when we get new territory, it's going to be a bit of work to keep it. The main problem will be that because we have depopulated the enemy regions already, the easiest territory to get in deals will be the ones with basically no population left. The way the game works is that roughly 400 population is the minimum, and you can't recruit units until you have about 600, growing at a couple of % per turn. So a place like Nicomedia or Salona in Illyria, which I also got in the same turn from Macedon, will be unable to quickly get a garrison that can win battles. In fact, because these places are below the 2000 pop threshold needed to be a level 2 settlement, that means they can't get the level 2 barracks needed to make even regular hoplites. There are solutions to this, which we will see, the simplest of all being just make a garrison in another settlement and move it. The only danger being that if you get stuck in a field battle with a tiny garrison force of hoplites, it might not go very well. There is actually, I think, an exploit that I discovered towards the end of this campaign that would allow me to safely move units across the map without worrying about big enemy armies attacking them. And maybe I'll remember to talk about that way later. There is a way around this problem that I didn't know about yet. But anyway, complain as I must. It is entirely possible to get these settlements up to speed, and we'll see ways of doing that, aside from the one I didn't know about. For Salona though, it's all going to be a moot point, as the Brutii immediately bribed it over to their side. Since the place sucked, the bribe price was probably really low. The price also depends on how rich/powerful your faction is. So if we can get rich, then this will be less of a risk. For now, we just sulk and we can have our sour grapes because Salona kind of sucked for us anyway, being that we couldn't really move units over there. One place that's much better for us is Lilybaeum, the settlement in western Sicily, which we secure from Carthage with another deal. Then I make a deal with the Red Romans, the Julii, to get a theoretically useless acquisition, Massalia. 2 points to make about all of this. One is that there is probably a reason why all of these deals are happening at once. Since everything declared war on us, or everyone declared war on us in the beginning, there is most likely a set amount of time that needs to pass before the war is allowed to end from their diplomatic perspective. Although actually I've seen examples where you can force a war to end like one turn after it starts. In fact, we'll see some of that in this campaign if I recall. Well anyway, since those factions lost all of their battles against us, they were probably eager to end the war, and as soon as some hidden threshold was passed, they all suddenly sent diplomats to end the war. You might note all of these negotiations are happening at their behest. It's in their turn, they're coming to me and asking for these peace treaties, and I'm getting the regions back. So it's all going well. This is a good sign for the campaign. The enemy can be broken and forced to give us territory, even if we never leave our settlements, so that's ideal. But the other point to make is about Massalia, or Massilia as it's called in the game. I was really annoyed that I didn't get to keep Massilia for very long, spoilers, due to how amazingly useful it would have been way later in the campaign. I would easily say that this campaign would have been much faster, 3 times faster, I don't know, if I controlled Massilia, for the simple reason that it would act as an additional beacon for Death Wish enemies to hone in on, giving me more factions to deal with, and more importantly than that, giving Red Rome something to waste their energy on, rather than, say, conquering the entire map. And if you've played this game, you can probably guess that if we don't actively control Rome, they will go out and conquer the entire map. The game is designed such that Rome will win, essentially, so if you don't play as Rome, then you have to do something about them as soon as possible. And were Rome to be extremely powerful, that could make things difficult for us. Foreshadowing! Needless to say, with the AI being ultra aggressive, they were happy to break these peace deals like 2 turns after getting them. So they now start sieging down Massilia. Before we look at that though, a massive army from Macedon is attacking in Greece. This is nothing new, and that's going to be happening just constantly, nothing too much to worry about. I wanted to take this chance to point out a couple of things about the specific way I am defending here, as there is marginally more than meets the eye. What you'll often see in this campaign is that I adopt a formation with 2 units forming a V shape just on the edge of a street corner, with a 3rd unit usually added in a long thin line that crosses out this V, so to speak. This setup was the result of many experiments with placing units in different arrangements and locations in the town, and seems to be the best setup. Here's why I think that. First, one possible solution to the fact that a phalanx can be broken or phased through is to have another phalanx unit overlapping it but like 1 or 2 ranks back. This creates the effect where the broken phalanx line in the front fights with swords and blocks the enemy, but the overlapping phalanx is still able to attack with spears. The spears can attack through your own men just fine. In practice, this will usually break as well because the momentum system means the lines get pushed around a lot and the second phalanx will probably get drawn into the sword fighting. But it works at least a bit, at least sometimes. However, if you really just stack phalanxes on top of each other, the momentum thing starts working the other way as well. The backup phalanx pushes the forward phalanx into the enemy, so they slide forwards during fights and get even more likely to lose phalanx mode. So if you're thinking, well, you could just have like 6 phalanx units with each one overlapping 1 rank behind the last, that creates a volcano of troops stuck in this endless collision glitching with the buildings nearby and also nearby troops in this really like greasy, slidey Half-Life 2 prop stuck in a wall looking in slow motion thing. Well, the strike-through unit in this formation I'm using is the compromise to all of my attempts to do something like that. It provides a thin backup line of spears to both of the main phalanxes in the V, without adding too much mass or making either formation move around constantly. It also catches the odd enemy that slides down the walls and gets behind the corners of the main phalanxes, which is a very common occurrence and can cause big issues. Now for the more speculative part of why I think this is so great. You won't see the AI using an obvious tactic to counter this formation, ranged attacks. My belief is that having 3 units on top of each other, obscuring the line of sight on each other, you could say, makes the AI, when they give a ranged attack unit an attack order, usually just think it can't get line of sight. What happens in that case is it will keep getting closer trying to get line of sight until it can fire, and if it never fires, then suddenly it's in melee. From my experiments, this setup virtually always makes the AI's ranged units just walk into melee without a second thought, whereas other setups had allowed the AI to stand nearby and just shoot at you. Either straight at you or more dangerously from nearby streets. They can shoot over building tops quite easily, which often lands flanking hits that can't be blocked by units' shield stat. This doesn't matter so much with armoured hoplites because their armour stat means they're good against everything, so ranged attacks don't do all that much, but they are still theoretically weak against them, at least compared to other kinds of attacks, so best to avoid them, I think. There is another factor at play here, which is the placement as well. If there is a street corner nearby, so the enemy have to slightly walk around a corner just before the melee, because the pathfinding near corners is really janky, if a unit can get line of sight on you by standing right next to you, it will probably still go into melee anyway, because the path to quote-unquote next to you will like involve moving behind you and then back again, or something weird like that because of pathfinding jank, which will also force a melee in which no ranged unit has any hope whatsoever. Also playing on the maximum unit size probably just amplifies all of these problems and makes it very likely that like a bit of a unit will end up in melee in the corner and that will draw in the rest, something like that. Let's stop talking about good setups and talk about this bad setup here. This is what happened with my attempts to defend Massilia. Since the enemy only brought 1 ram, I thought I could choke point them at the gate. This is rare because the AI will almost always bring 3 or 4 rams to all sieges no matter what the wall situation is, so usually you can't hold them at the walls with any reliability. This Massilia situation doesn't look good though. The momentum thing is on clear display, because while I did have a killing field of spears at the gate, we are just pushed away by the enemy rushing through, so it didn't do anything. And then they have a general who can easily take on the militia hoplites from the front, and soon we're getting killed big time. And not fighting on our capture point means we can rout, making this even worse. I was mad, I was a fool, and what I really think is there might actually have been a way to win this battle with a different formation placed on the capture point, and the strategic difference a win here would have made to this campaign could have been absolutely everything, as perhaps you will appreciate later on. I'm just really mad about this particular instance. Let's try to forget about it once again. We'll simply take the L, but we also have to take an L over at Nicomedia, as Pontus also betrayed us instantly. Here I started destroying buildings and recruiting peasants to ruin the settlement, the idea being that because recruits are removed from the population even without being recruited, this might depopulate the settlement when Pontus take it. I'm not sure if it works like that, maybe they go back into the pool when the place changes hands. Well, our gains are being reversed, that's the big point. Of the 4 settlements I claimed after the first round of war, we held only one, Lilybaeum, since Carthage didn't betray me, despite having a massive army standing right beside the town ready to take it. #thanks Carthage. Well, we've learned the hard way that while we can gain territory, we need to work to keep it. So what can I do differently to make this next round of mass killing more productive? First, some random stuff. Here's a battle that came up in which Unius the Honest from Macedon faces off against his true enemies, the Honesty trio of Antigonus the Honest, Nicanor the Honest, and Doros the Honest. I think what's happening here is if you leave a general in a settlement with an academy, they get taught ethics and become the honest due to changes in their traits, something like that. So that's nice. Not a lie to be found here. We honestly will not kill you if you don't run into our spear wall. But alas, it is too enticing, it seems. You might also see in the background here, the city is partially leveled. That's because catapults have been at work. But this doesn't actually matter, as destroyed areas are still impassable, so there's no gameplay effect to losing buildings, although you do have to pay to repair them later on. Well, Unius the Honest almost flees with his men, but as a mark of chivalry, he comes back right at the end of the battle and dies. He was a good man, albeit not a good general. Now here is an actual thing I can do. Ask for peace myself. One of the only things I can actually do on the campaign is diplomacy, but that doesn't mean it's going to be useful most of the time, as what tends to be the case is that most factions who declare war on you won't accept peace for a predetermined amount of time, as speculated earlier, and sometimes will literally never take peace under any circumstances, no matter how hard you beat them. So I won't be showing this, but just know that I was gradually placing diplomats all over the place and constantly tried to get deals, almost always failing. We'll highlight the cases where it finally worked, somehow, with somehow being the full extent of the explanation or analysis I can offer, really. Honest as Unius the Deadass. Here is the next technique for making real progress. Bribery. Yes, if we save up enough money, we can buy settlements. Getting money isn't that difficult because we don't have that many units, broadly speaking, and Greek cities have some of the best regions possible for income. A region's income is tied to an invisible stat for the most part, so while you can get more income using buildings, it depends much more on the inherent value of a region and also its population level. So that's how I bought Athens, possibly the most valuable city in the game, able to get you like 10k per turn once it's fully upgraded. Whether we can get any given place via bribery is going to be a game of chance, and of course of wealth. For example, it would be better here to have got Corinth, because it's easier to garrison from Sparta, but I probably just wasn't able to. There are going to be various situations where bribery can't be done, or is extremely expensive. In this case, I'm just going to have to awkwardly move my army around Corinth to garrison Athens, hoping the Macedonians don't just swarm me. Fortunately, nothing happened, and we do get Athens locked down soon enough. So this is what we need to do really, take regions that are, ideally, 1 turn's march away from our current territory and no more than 2. The map doesn't make this possible in most regions though. In fact, Greece is just about the best region possible because all the settlements are next to each other. But we'll also run into issues in that certain governors make towns unbribable too. either if they have a trait that increases the bribe limit or is an unbribable trait, or if they are a faction heir or leader who can never be bribed. So that means if a faction is small enough that they probably have one of their faction leader or heir like governing the nearest settlement to you, you can end up unable to advance. Well, we'll see that, of course. Still, bribery will be a key tool in our arsenal. As you might have seen, it was through bribery I not only got Nicomedia back, but banished the large Pontic army nearby. The prices here are quite manageable, as the bribe price depends heavily on A, what you're bribing, but much more importantly on B, how rich their faction is. So it might cost a few thousand to bribe away a full stack from a poor faction, but you'll need like 40 grand to get rid of half a stack of units from a faction that's been gathering money for the whole campaign. And I say this because, of course, many factions will be making much more money than they're spending and getting very rich the longer this campaign goes on, which will interfere with my plans. Before I can get troops together to go and lock Nicomedia down for good, I have to defend nearby Pergamon against the Seleucids, who have conquered their way across Anatolia to come get in on the Pacifist action. They brought a load of scythed chariots, which proved to be a big mistake for two reasons. Firstly, they are glitchy and regularly get stuck in the streets, which sucks for me as well because then I can't really kill them. And secondly, they have a chance to run amok when routing, which enables friendly fire damage for them, meaning if they attack first, which they almost always do, then when they retreat, they will kill loads of the infantry behind them on the way out. Being sent into the meat grinder is one thing, but being sent into a grinder that also produces additional grinders and launches them at you, well, that's a bit worse. Hey, by the way, we lost the campaign. Yep, challenge failed, so I kind of knew this was going to happen, but I thought it would take longer. We can't see it, but the Julii have conquered all of the Germania territories and hence have achieved the victory goal. I had it on short campaign rules, which means you only need about 15 territories to win. I thought Rome also had to kill SQPR to win, but apparently not. There you have it, campaign failed. However, in Rome Total War, if you lose the short campaign, you can keep playing because it automatically switches to the domination campaign rules, which means you need to get 50 regions and to control Rome no matter what faction you are. So we're still in that race, and therefore we continue racing, I guess, but yeah, I was hoping to somehow get our short victory condition, which was 15 regions and kill Thrace and Macedon. I was hoping those factions would be killed by the Romans, of course, but alas. In fact, Macedon, my nearest neighbour, is going to be around for a long time, so I had no hope whatsoever of getting that short campaign completion really, in retrospect. When it comes to my war with the Seleucids, I focused heavily on bribing their armies, because while this is expensive, since they have the same units as us in many cases, we get their units this time rather than having them disappear. That's really useful not because of the units themselves, but because we can then move the units to a useless settlement like Nicomedia up there and disband them. The population drawing thing works in reverse too, so deleting units while in a settlement gives the settlement hundreds of extra people every time, so a large army can easily boost you up to the first couple of upgrade thresholds, which are 2,000 and 6,000 population. Once we're at 6,000, we can recruit armoured hoplites and then we'll be officially golden with any given region. There is another way to use that mechanic too, which we'll see in a bit. We get attacked by Macedon over at Athens, and this is the sort of thing we like to see, because here they have the option of using their massive army to siege us out. What we want here is for the AI to never think we're strong enough that it's worth sieging us out. One of the reasons, though, I didn't want to see many battles with walls was because of a secret ambition I had for this campaign that totally won't work out, so I'll just go over what it was here so you know what I'm not doing, more high quality commentary. I thought that by having loads of battles in the same place, which was quite likely to happen in this run, I would end up getting very large numbers of kills on a very small number of units, and that would mean I would be leveling those units up. And in Rome Total War, unit level massively changes its performance. Basically, you get 1 extra attack and defense per level, but since you can level up 10 times, and a generic unit has like 6 attack, 15 defense, something like that, you can add a relatively large amount of combat power to units. Obviously, how the numbers actually relate to performance is one of the great mysteries of the entire Total War series, and personally I absolutely hate that about these games. I actually mentioned in a previous commentary somewhere that I once went to CA in person for some event, and I complained right to the then developers about the difficulty of reading the stats and what they mean. That was in the Rome 2 days, I think, and I guess they never fixed it. At least in the early days, there were fewer stats, so it was easier to trial and error / experiment your way into knowing what significance a stat has, and I kind of feel like I've done that by this stage. In my very anecdotal experience, getting 1 or 2 stat points higher than your opponent makes a serious difference. You'll win in melee. But if you get like 5 stat points higher, you become nearly invincible against them. So now take something like Armored Hoplites. They have something like 10 attack, 20 defense by default. I forget the real stats. But if I could get them to level 10, well actually level 9 because level 0 is the first level, and also add the equipment upgrades which gives you 3 attack and defense more at the max level, I could make a unit with significantly higher stats than most stuff in the game. Normally you can't do this, because you level down when you retrain units to replace losses. But with Armored Hoplites, standing at a choke point they won't really take losses. Therefore the grand plan was to make a handful of units so strong that I could head out into field battles and just grind through whole armies with invincible units, giving me better control of the map and in some way allowing me to advance through the campaign, keeping in mind I wouldn't have been able to initiate battles, which means I can't take settlements without a very particular circumstance occurring, which will come up later on actually. But yes, I say all this just to announce that it's not going to make that much of a difference in the end. And there are units that can kill Armored Hoplites pretty reliably out there, so that's going to make it hard for us to keep them alive constantly and get that experience anyway. We won't see such units for a while, but yes, my whole what if I could have a 20 attack 30 defense unit dream is countered by the fact that our good old friends the Romans in the endgame can just make units with such stats, and they will also be able to get equipment upgrades and probably experience upgrades as well. So one day we'll have to reckon with the fact that Armored Hoplites aren't the best unit in the game, as it turns out, and indeed they can't be the best unit in the game no matter how hard they try. That's the real point. Very sad. Well, at least we're not there yet. We can revel in our ability to kill everybody whenever we want right now, at least. Goodbye to another Macedonian army. Here's me doing that thing I mentioned. All these Seleucid troops are now becoming my citizens, giving Nicomedia some recruitment power and soon upgrade potential as well. After defeating Macedon a couple more times, I was able to get a ceasefire deal, and this is a good one. We get Corinth. Not only is that great for our territorial integrity, but it comes with a wonder that boosts public order across the whole map, which will be essential later on. And it's another one of these regions that's one of the best in the game for income. The only downside is that it has walls. There is probably a way to edit your save game files to simulate removing walls and get what I want here, but I wasn't brave enough to try anything like that. The ceasefire with Macedon is great too, because now I can spend some time investing in all of the buildings in that area and getting our impenetrable walls of Armored Hoplites set up across all of Greece, ready for anything. However, a new opponent is on the table now, Egypt. They've decided to do naval invasions against us, having nothing better to do in their own part of the map, I suppose, and hence Rhodes is in trouble. Or is it, for whatever reason, they didn't attack in the first turn of their siege, which is a really bad sign because Rhodes has no walls, and I really thought the AI would never hold an unwalled settlement under siege, since they can't build any siege weapons here. So perhaps my theory is wrong, at least they very rarely do. Well, I staged a counter-landing with a veritable army of one, a diplomat, and after a brief chat, the Egyptians all agree to banish themselves into another dimension, leaving us be. And this works just as well as killing them for my depopulation plan, I believe, as bribed units don't return to their population pools, they just go into the Shadow Realm. Therefore, hopefully it's still hitting the enemy with long-term recruitment and upgrade issues and economic debuffs by having them lose armies like this rather than killing them, and it's all moving us closer to some sort of juicy ceasefire deal, perhaps anyway. Speaking of such deals, it's worth mentioning that I was often able to get ceasefires that weren't very juicy. Generally, it would be something like getting a ceasefire, trade rights, and maybe some money, and such an arrangement would last like a handful of turns, before the AI went back to the madness. Usually I took these when I could, because not being attacked for a couple of turns is a nice break, especially as I have more population than most of the regions around me. So I'm growing faster. I have some economic advantage, you could say, to be gleaned in doing nothing harder than everyone else. Well, here's a better deal. I bribed Apollonia onto our side. The issue is that there is a large Brutii army between me and it. And then, oops, we bribed them as well. We are benefiting here from the fact that the Brutii haven't been able to expand because they tried to expand into us from the beginning. So they'll only have 3 settlements, now 2 I guess, making them unusually poor for a Roman faction. Combined with me being unusually rich, we are able to blow our whole treasury getting this new settlement and securing the road to it. I rush a general over and we'll get to work there. Luckily it wasn't quite depopulated either, so I can even recruit things there. Now over at Nicomedia, we see the other method I can use to repopulate newly acquired territory: peasant colonists. Peasants are cheap and large units, making them ideal for moving people around the map. So by bringing a bunch of peasants over from Pergamon, I'm able to rapidly boost Nicomedia's population using the much faster population generation of the larger town. We're already at something like 10,000 here. My usual target was to get places to 12,000 ASAP if I thought they were going to be attacked, because that lets you upgrade it to the settlement size. That is extremely easy to defend because of how the map works, and it's the one I'd most thoroughly tested as well. It only has 2 entrances to its massive capture point, and so 4 units can hold it, 6 units will hold it real good. You've probably seen that map already. It's the one we've seen most often so far, and we'll be seeing it again soon enough, I expect. And here are some extra colonists courtesy of the Seleucids, so we're drawing even more population from them, and hence long-term income from them maybe. Probably a profitable investment in the long run, if the run gets long enough, like adding people. I don't know what it is, it's like 100 people gives you 1 extra coin per turn, something like that, but it varies immensely per region, so there isn't really any rule to it. Maybe after a really long time it would be worth bribing massive armies and then disbanding them immediately in your own territory to get more taxpayers. Maybe that takes like 100 turns to pay off. Well, this campaign's gonna run long enough that is actually a relevant factor, let me tell you. A new phase in this campaign begins soon when Egypt comes crawling over for some peace, and I'll be able to get here 2 regions in the deal, Palmyra and Bostra. The slight problem is that I'll never be able to reinforce or colonize such places without walking a long way through seas of enemy armies. But this is where being the Greek cities comes in clutch once again, I think anyway, because we partially share a unit roster with Egypt. It seems we get a whole load of terrible units thrown into the region trade deal. I have this extremely vague feeling. The game might sometimes automatically generate a couple of units when you get given a foreign region, so you don't lose it immediately. I think I'm making that up, I'm not quite sure. Maybe that's wishful thinking. Well, at least here, we get an unusually large amount of militia hoplites and peasants to guard our new possessions. And since we also just got a ceasefire deal, we've probably got at least a couple of turns to get a barracks or a couple of real hoplite units together too over there before something goes wrong. So that's good, but I wanted to start another colonial venture in the west also. This time though, I needed to be more careful. I was after Thapsus near Carthage. First I began a bribe, which lets you know that A, it is possible to bribe the place, and B, what the rough price is going to be. And with that all looking good, I can then cancel the bribe and begin preparing additional troops and ships over in Sicily, so that I can later combine the bribe with a landing to quickly secure the new territory. Along similar lines, I've moved part of the garrison of Pergamon and Rhodes onto a few ships, plus some colonial peasants, in the hopes of getting them over to the Middle East. I really want to get armoured hoplites into those new settlements before Egypt suddenly decides to spam 10 armies at me or something. They do have those armies ominously hanging around said settlements already, so I need to do something here. I'm also in my rich era, as I call it, so instead of fighting enemies, I'm just bribing everything that comes near us. Pontus were absolutely obliterated in this fashion. I stopped fighting them for ages, but I bribed their armies over and over. Even sending diplomats over to their settlements to just bribe everything that walked outside of the gates. And with this, I think I did drain their population, so it's great to see this method does actually work. I say that because they stopped attacking me after a while and stopped recruiting things. So I think, yes, they were out of people after a while. We just bought everyone from Pontus, either paying them to just go off into the void, or in the case of many generals, joining us. So that's all great. Here's me disappearing a load of Brutiid troops. Because their settlements are massive, the chance of them depopulating is quite low. Once a place has something like 10 to 20,000 population, you probably can't recruit faster than you're generating people on average. And the Roman settlements tend to grow up to the max size easy enough thanks to their high fertility. That's the background stat that makes our regions really good as well. Over at Syracuse, we're being attacked by the Blue Romans, who are similarly hobbled to the Green Romans, possessing most likely only 2 settlements. There's nothing special about this battle other than it took place on a fully upgraded city map. I think this is the first time this happened, which I wanted to mention to follow on from my point earlier about the 12k city map being the best. When you get to 24k population, you have the huge city map, which unfortunately for the Greek cities is worse than the large city map, because it has 3 entrances instead of 2, and one of the 3 is basically 2 different ones in parallel that need 2 different formations of hoplites to properly hold. So while 6 units is always enough and more than enough to defend a large city, for a huge city you need like at least 8, costing you at least 400 extra money per turn, something like that, to have the ideal garrison. And in some cases you might not even get that much extra income from having the city grow to that size. Since most of our regions are good, that probably won't be the case, but it very well might be more trouble than it's worth to level up a not very good settlement to the huge city level, if that place is perpetually on the front line, that is, and needs a constant strong garrison. Our empire right now is set up such that any settlement can be attacked at any time, so I'm kind of garrisoning everything. Eventually, maybe we'll be able to form some kind of peaceful area, who knows. The other thing about this map was that I didn't really know where best to stand to make the enemy's ranged AI always charge into melee, that thing I talked about earlier. And I did have some trouble in various battles on this map, although I also found a couple of good spots right away because it's similar to other maps where standing near corners or just around a corner usually obliterates the AI, that sort of thing. Well anyway, we do suitably kill the Romans. The battle's easy enough because these Blue Romans can only field terrible troops, so that's that. My adventure to get troops down to Bostra via sea was a success. It did mean trespassing, but I had no faith whatsoever that Egypt wasn't going to try and kill me soon, so it doesn't really matter if we ruin our relations. Although just before those troops got to Bostra safely, we do get some bad news. It's Marian reforms time. That means the Roman factions will begin to get access to some very superior units and the best units in the game. It unlocks the Legionary Cohort, Praetorian Cohort and Urban Cohort unit line, which is a really good answer to Armoured Hoplites. Stat-wise, only the Legionary Cohort are comparable to Armoured Hoplites, with the other 2 being significantly better. Since I have focused on getting experience and equipment upgrades, in practice we will be stronger than the base Legionaries, so that is something, but this stuff I was ranting about before where armour saves let you skip through spears, that's going to be an issue when things like Praetorians hit the field, especially because if I recall correctly, Praetorians have armor-piercing damage on their melee weapons. I don't know if I'm making that up. Again, just remembering things from the bad old days and like modding this game and looking in the files. So Praetorians and Urban Cohort maybe as well might be really good against heavily armoured units. And of course they have either the same armour as Armoured Hoplites or more of it, meaning they are not going to stand there and just get hit by the phalanx over and over. They can walk straight through the first couple of attacks and get into a sword fight just fine, unless the AI doesn't want to do that, and that will sometimes happen, and relying on AI glitches and standing in the precise points on maps that cause those AI glitches, as talked about earlier, will become more important, I guess, because like in theory, a militia hoplite unit can sometimes defeat like a Praetorian Guard unit, because the AI doesn't always want to push through a spear phalanx. Sometimes they're fine to stand at a distance where they can't hit you, but you can hit them. Although militia hoplites probably don't have the stats to like ever get through a Praetorian Guard's armor save. Whatever, the point is, while we're not completely doomed, we're not going to be completely steamrolling battles like we have been so far. The end of our easy battles era is going to begin here. Oh, and while I was ranting, looks like The Thapsus plan has been pulled off, so we've got the bribe and then we can instantly throw some units in there to lock it down. That's looking good. Now let's expand our new theatres with some more bribing. First we get Hatra here, which is a very dodgy acquisition because I can't spare any of the limited nearby troops to go over there, and it can only recruit militia hoplites. The only saving grace is that it wasn't totally depopulated, so at least I can make something. Then I got Lepkis Magna from Numidia over in Africa. This one is a more solid acquisition because it's so far from everything that it probably won't be attacked. Plus, I can easily ship new population from Sicily, where Syracuse will happily generate all the people I need. And this one came with a general, which I can use to step outside, grab some mercs, and quickly add a garrison to this place. I can even disband them later, to get people to appear out of nowhere effectively. You might also have noticed that sometimes when you bribe somewhere, there's this long delay before it lets you come off the bribe screen, this weird lag. And that's caused by the merchant system added in the remaster, kind of backported from Medieval 2. Broadly speaking, I never used this system because, well, I couldn't really be bothered. You can make money from trading various resources on the map using merchants, but when I checked I thought, well, it's not that much and I guess I don't want to do it. Because while it's better than not doing it, the AI will constantly spam merchants to replace yours, and you have to do it back to keep your trade going. And that's too annoying. So added challenge run rule, no recruiting or giving orders to merchants. I did have a few that came with settlements, but set to auto-manage, which makes the AI completely control the whole merchant system, and I have no idea what it did with them, so that's all good. And the lag, by the way, is caused by when you capture a region. All of the merchants have to kind of move off their resources and stand next to them, which it does in slow motion and you just can't see it happening, so it looks like there's a weird lag spike, but there actually isn't. It's just slightly poorly thought out. Now we reach the point where Egypt goes on the attack against our Middle Eastern territories, and we are broadly speaking not ready for this. However, this was to be expected and we do have another recourse. It's bribery time. The Egyptians are moderately expensive to bribe, but not enough that I can't do it. Therefore, with a few bribes, I not only lift 2 sieges they started in the first turn of the war, but I also delete one of their full stacks nearby. We probably bribed about half of the Egyptians we can currently see into oblivion, although it cost many turns of income to do so. Still, that's going to improve our chances dramatically in Hatra and Palmyra, where the armies aren't really good enough to hold. In Bostra, the southernmost one, we have the armoured hoplites from my earlier shipping antics, so hopes are better there. Eventually, of course, we are out of money and will have to actually fight these guys. But the good news is that the Egyptians aren't going to be bringing anything too powerful, so the fact I have only a mix of militia and normal hoplites here at Palmyra isn't going to be the problem I worried it would be, because units with barely any armour, aka everything Egypt has because they're stuck in the Bronze Age in this game because of memes, they're the sorts of enemies that really can't break a phalanx, even the low-level ones. Plus cav and chariots, making up a large portion of this particular army, are even worse at doing that. So on the Egyptian front, while it's a little light and tenuous, it is going to be easier than our other fronts to defend pretty much right up until the end game, when Egypt do get Pharaoh's Guard, who are basically armoured hoplites but without a shield, and they can walk through phalanxes just fine, so watch out for that later on. Another thing to mention about Egypt is that in every battle where they brought desert axemen, which was most of them, the same glitch occurred, but only to one unit. I don't remember if I mentioned it already, but another of my quality of life caveats for this challenge was that if a unit glitches in such a way that it stops the battle ending, I was allowed to attack it, because while you can wait for the timer to run down and still win just to be pure, I was trying to play this stupid campaign as quickly as possible, obviously, so I did go out to challenge their general, who was doing nothing, and the axeman, who had split up into a cloud that reminds me of the way Total War Rome 2 glitches out. For whatever reason, this always happened with Desert Axemen in this campaign. It's probably caused by the unit size being on the max, which is called something like experimental, perhaps hinting it doesn't fully work all the time. The fight out there actually goes badly because militia hoplites can't really beat the general and such, but after taking heavy losses, I do end the battle like 30 real-world seconds earlier than it would have been if I just ended it on its own with the timer. And as usual, I'll be writing to the families of the lost men to inform them that I really enjoyed those extra 30 seconds of gameplay, so all those deaths surely weren't in vain. But the main takeaway is that we probably won't have to worry all that much about Egyptian invasions after all. Other than perhaps the fact that they have so many troops and armies that it is going to take a while to kill them all, so, well, praise Ra, I'm cutting most of the battles out of this campaign entirely. Here's another recurring feature of our wars with Egypt in this campaign: ceasefires. For one reason or another, Egypt were the most willing to accept ceasefire agreements out of any faction, which will really help us out. In fact, with Egypt, there were 2 wars, I think, where we ended the war on the first turn with no hostilities. We'll see an example of that in a second, actually. But the point is, all of these rules about how I thought ceasefires work with like AI calculations do seem to go out the window with these guys, whereas the smaller and weaker factions like Armenia, Pontus, the Seleucids, Parthia, what's left of Macedon, people with no money, territory or power would always refuse peace, even if I offered them loads of cash for it. I think there's some sort of system where a weak AI thinks that it has to play the game somehow, right? It has to come back from its state of weakness, so it needs to capture territory, and it doesn't value peace as a result. Anyway, we'll be using this peaceful Egypt to make some big territory gains, as they've managed to take most of the Seleucid Empire out before we showed up. Therefore, we now get Damascus and Seleucia, 2 very tasty acquisitions. Both come with free troops to garrison them, and Seleucia is even already at the pop threshold to progress into the large city ultra-defensible map, which could come in handy as taking this area means we now border Parthia, and since they're stuck between us and the map edge, the probability of them attacking us is about 200%. In fact, they're already standing suspiciously right on the border with an army. So, time to get the armoured hoplites ready and see what happens there. Now a brief trip back to somewhere or other in Greece, where Macedon are on the attack once again. Here I'm fighting on this huge city map that I don't like and having trouble with this one entrance to the city square in particular. It's hard here to set up the slightly around a corner formation I was going on about, which makes the AI behave very normally when they attack. We're facing a pike phalanx from the front, which could be very dangerous since they outrange us. Well, speaking of range, the other issue is that their ranged units are behaving normally too. They stand back and bombard my roadblock, not even suicidally charging into it. I need to do some more experiments to get the round the corner effect into play here, and probably have the units be standing on top of each other more to defend against just people breaking through in general. The issue is that doing that while defending the capture point here is difficult because the junction's very open, so if I was putting my troops around the corner, so to speak, in this area, I'd probably be leaving a flank open for the enemy to walk around my whole formation and just go and take the capture point and generally mess things up for me. Ideally, we would here try to defend further forward, so out somewhere in the town, but the problem is this road goes straight into an open square with many entrances, so defending the road itself will have the same problem as defending the end of the road. And defending the square at the other side will mean I have to defend like 3 different directions, and it would just be really complicated and messy, and there will always be places for the enemy to keep doing this ranged attack thing against me. It's a difficult little setup. Like, this map just doesn't quite work for exploit purposes. That's a shame. Also, usually this exploit only works the first time the enemy make an attack, so it's like the ranged units will come in and they'll either just run forwards and die, but if they don't, like if they manage to find a real target, they'll usually stay out there and keep shooting. Even if you move around and make it so that now they don't have a real target, they'll probably have some more clever AI and will just shoot over buildings and such. Well, you can see in this battle, we're having some trouble with it. It's actually pretty easy to deal with, so like I don't know why I'm complaining so much. I can just stand there because armored hoplites have really high armor, of course, and the maximum shield stat, like the same as the Roman endgame tower shield guys for some reason. So they're ultra strong against ranged attacks. It barely does anything, other than like armor-piercing attacks from ballista bolts or something. But the AI always targets buildings in sieges, so we never get attacked by any siege weapons. They're actually some in the background. They're not doing anything. There is another way I could deal with this too, which I thought I'd touch on here and probably talk about more later. Yes, some of you might have already realized that what you can do in this challenge run is just order your troops to walk at the enemy, and then press halt right as they make contact. This effectively makes you give an attack order without ever giving an attack order. I was just ordering my guys to go and stand where the enemy happens to be standing, which forces a fight to happen. If you don't click halt, by the way, your guys will like walk into the enemy and take a bunch of damage, but it still kind of works as well, especially with armored units, and you won't get any charge bonus or anything like that, but with a phalanx, you don't really need it. So perhaps you can see the big weakness hanging over this rule set. Luckily, it didn't come up for almost the whole game, as I was basically self-imposing this don't give any orders at all rule set, which I had originally wanted to play with. Generally, I would just stand still until there was a glitch, or like it was in the battle route phase. Here it's kind of a bit of both, these ballistas are just glitched out. So I would sometimes do something, but generally I wouldn't even move around, even though moving around is allowed in the rule set. But it is a weakness in the rule set. You can use moving around to effectively do everything that attack orders would normally let you do, just a little bit worse. And there were some cases where I did use this and I felt like I needed to do it, so we'll see those as they come up. But, well, what I'm saying is there's another weakness in the pacifism here on display in this take over the entire world and kill everybody campaign. Who would have thought the guys killing everyone, taking over the world actually do have a dark secret, that they're not as peaceful as they seem? Well, let's just move on. We're able to grab Dumatha, the town in the very bottom right corner of the map, which is neat and stuff, I guess. We've gone from being roughly in the middle to the very edge, but territory out here is particularly unhelpful to us. Firstly, it's depopulated and it's a terrible region that absolutely will cost more to keep on our side than it will ever give us in tax. Secondly, and part of the reason for that first reason, is we have a massive distance from capital penalty to public order. It's something like -80 because we're so far from Sparta, and I think that's the maximum it's allowed to be. So that means I need to keep loads of units and ideally a governor in these frontier places like this, or they will revert to other factions, and I think that did happen here and there, so we'll get to see that. I could move our capital to, say, Rhodes, being slightly more central for our territory, or like somewhere in the Middle East even. But I didn't want to get into a juggling match, since I also want to expand west as well, and I figured I would just deal with it all somehow. Here's another look at a Macedonian assault from around this time, where my around-the-corner simulator formation appears to be working. We've slightly got the AI to jank themselves into making less effective attacks here, but it's a relatively thin and high unit cost formation, or high unit count really. So it's not going to work as well as the classic 3-unit strike-through V formation from earlier. I probably still could do that here, but with like 5 units and make a bigger V and still get something similar going. Well, who knows. We slightly solved the huge city defense problem, I guess. Here's an example of the insta-peace that Egypt were willing to go in for now and again. This was their second declared war on us, and we are fortunate in that because I'm insane, I always ask for peace, like every turn, with every faction, just in case somehow they will. It virtually never works, and this is one of the extremely rare cases where doing this pays off. They will accept peace without fighting at all, and they will give me Petra, so for whatever reason they figured actually we're at a massive disadvantage in this war, let's just get out of it instantly. Very good. This town, Petra, is going to be another like frontier, nothingy, hard to defend sort of place that probably costs more than it's ever going to make. But still, we are gradually taking the Ptolemaic Empire apart, like piece by piece. They've lost half their lands to us so far, albeit the half that was probably only contributing like 10% of their income, since they do have the rich territories on the Nile to prop them up, so we're probably not weakening them very much. We'll still have to deal with them quite a lot for sure. Still, it's free progress in the campaign. Thank you very much. And as you might have seen there, we did lose Dumatha again due to public order troubles. I'll be marching out to get it back with an army of 1, but in the meantime, we can grab a much better territory, Messena in Sicily. This is one I've been gunning for a while, since it would complete the island very nicely. The problem was that the Scipii had their faction leader there, meaning it was unbribable. But it seems one day that faction leader left or died, and I was finally able to make an attempt, and since the Scipii are confined to 2 regions, they aren't all that hard to bribe once the chance comes up. Therefore, we drop like 13k and get this really great acquisition. This means an end to my battles in Sicily essentially, and a load more money coming in, as it's a decent region. But perhaps most importantly, it means the Romans have to sweat a little bit more as I'm one step closer to Italy. And remember, to win this campaign I have to take Rome, due to it being on the dominance victory conditions. Which is actually called something else, as I recall, like conquest victory, I don't remember. Basically the hardest victory conditions. The Scipii did bring a large army to try and retake Messina, and it is unbribable, so we'll see what they can do. In the meantime, I am bribing my way across the Brutii lands, removing armies around the place, and even stealing one of their generals here. I can't remember if I ever mentioned it, but at some point I got Apollonia from them. Don't remember when it was because I've had it for so much of the campaign that I don't recall when I got it. Yes, the majority of this campaign is actually still ahead of us, but don't worry, I will cut out quite a lot of things as things really begin to grind. Here's some actual progress though. I got a long-awaited peace deal with Macedon, and grabbed Tylis in the deal. It's in a disconnected area, but it's good enough that I can build up a respectable garrison here without sending colonists. This will now act as a nice aggro beacon for people to attack. In particular, if you're looking very closely, you might be able to tell from the lines on the map borders that Red Rome control my border here. I don't have the map information to really tell, but obviously they probably went on to take a lot of territory after winning the campaign earlier, and sooner or later we'll have to face them. The Scipii brought a second stack of troops to their siege at Messina, but these were outrageously cheap to bribe into oblivion, so clearly the Scipii are on their last legs. Once they attack, things really are okay because the Scipii haven't been doing anything since well before the Marian reforms. That means they haven't lost any units and therefore haven't replaced them with the good ones. So we only have to face Hastati and Principes, which while pretty decent are still in the plausible realms of balancing. Messina also had a triumphal arch built right by the capture point. The Scipii clearly were very impressed at their own achievements in holding territory the game gives them right at the start against all of precisely 0 attacks. So it was my delight to use this arc to break up the enemy's attacks now, such that they could be killed directly below it. Here's one for my Roman haters in the house, let it all soak in. They did have one good unit here, their faction leader, who has the post-Marian bodyguard unit. These guys are almost cataphracts despite their appearance. That means they can easily go toe-to-toe with hoplites and will break the formation instantly and turn things into a regular melee. Even if they can pull off one-to-one trades in combat, however, I have enough men that I can gradually grind them down, and the rest of the fight will be trivially easy as like Town Watch and Hastati just die or rout instantly when facing experienced and upgraded armoured hoplites. After a while we were able to kill their faction leader, and after that the majority of their army routed in shame, and I probably pursued them and killed enough to delete the stack. Therefore Messina is safe for the time being. The Scipii did continuously try to take this place back for a long time, but they never sent an army as big as that one, so we probably won't look at it in this video. With only one settlement left, which is Capua over on the mainland, one of the places they start with, they probably won't be able to recruit very much, and I think that's partially because they have a quite large navy, and that navy's never going to lose any battles, hence they can't get rid of it, so it's just a money pit for them. They can't do much with it because they've spent all their money on ships, they can't bring units over. So they occasionally brought a couple of units to try and do something here, and it never succeeded, and if I recall correctly, I mostly just bribed them into oblivion and got a bunch of commanders out of the deal. I can't remember, but I think the Romans do actually get cheat money, like them specifically, so that they can be a more overpowered faction and generally are more likely to progress in the campaign. I think they get like 5,000 money per turn. Don't know where I'm pulling this from in my memory, might be making that up, and it might be based on the difficulty level as well. I think we're only playing on medium here, just the default settings, so I don't think that lets the AI cheat too much. No idea, we're just making things up once again in an off-AD commentary. The actual point is that our war with the Scipii is basically over, we don't have to worry about them, and hence our western territories are now very secure. The majority of the settlements over here on this side of the map were never attacked again for the rest of the campaign, as I vaguely recall. We'll see. Things are looking good over here. While I was ranting there, I took Ankara from Pontus. This is a place that certainly isn't secure and will need a big garrison, but still nice to creep over there. It's even a place that, while depopulated, is good enough we can likely make a profit from it even if we add a sizable army there. Here's what I need to do with these distant settlements with terrible public order: have an army hovering nearby to garrison it the moment a bribe goes through. Even this will still be dodgy. Luckily, tiny depopulated settlements get the maximum garrison bonus with only a tiny army, as it's proportional to the population, a very nice feature. Then I'll try and get our superior temples going and hope the gods keep people in line. I need to do something similar with another project I've got going on in Western Africa, stealing a terrible settlement from Numidia out in the desert. I'm abandoning the settlement here after the first failed attempt to prepare an army to get it again later. In both cases, you can get a sliver of extra public order by destroying everything in the settlement. Every building adds to the culture penalty if you didn't build it yourself. So leveling the place and rebuilding it does help, at a cost. In this campaign though, since I don't need things like stables and archery ranges, it's even more viable to destroy and replace them. I did this at Damatha, for example, and here's me using a similar setup on Nepte to just about cling onto that as well. Now, you'll never guess who washed up dead. The Scipii. This must have been because their family leader and heir happened to die at the same time of natural causes, or maybe a rebellion killed their only settlement. Whatever the case, now we totally don't need to worry about them. What I wanted was to take Capua now for myself. I had a diplomat bribe the Brutii army trying to take it. Then I expected to easily bribe the settlement. But nay. Bribing does work in mysterious ways, and while rebel settlements with no one in them are usually the cheapest bribes ever, here I couldn't do it. It might be because there was a large population there, on account of the Scipii not recruiting things. So that was hugely increasing the bribe price. The thing to note is that when someone says no to a bribe, it can either mean they are not bribable, or just that your faction treasury is too meagre to afford the bribe. They know how much money you have, and will only propose an amount that you can afford. So if you can't afford it, they'll just say no. That means it can be a bit confusing, and if you come back to the same place turn after turn with different treasury amounts, sometimes they'll accept it and sometimes they won't. Ultimately, we don't get Capua there, and the Brutii did end up taking it. As a consolation prize, I did get Tarsus this turn, inching closer to connecting our Middle Eastern territories to our Anatolian territories, which would be nice. Now, we're getting to the point in the campaign when the Julii are going to be coming at us quite a lot. This is the long part of the campaign I alluded to, because the Julii will be able to make infinite armies, and they are extremely unwilling to take peace because they're always going to have the strength advantage. They've conquered all the stuff north of Greece. Not quite killing Macedon actually, but taking everything else. You might see here I temporarily controlled Bisalura during this stage of the campaign for a bit, which I think I got as part of some deal with Thrace or something, who are also now mainly dead but exist with one settlement in Crimea, something like that. We won't be holding Bisalura for long, suffice to say, because of the Romans. We'll see that soon, I expect. Another thing to say about the Julii is that they're extremely unbribable because they're very rich and strong, so even small groups of units need tens of thousands to bribe, and full armies or settlements will take hefty wads indeed. That said, we don't need to take any Julii territory to win the campaign, so long as they leave some lesser factions unconquered around the edges for us to bribe. Unrelated to that, I need to mention something else that could be completely run-ending for this challenge, yet somehow almost never came up. Naval blockades. Naval blockades add a public order penalty to the associated settlement that builds up every turn. We see an example here at Bostra, where it's being made to rebel by some pirates on the coast who never stop blockading your ports. But that's the thing, all the other factions will stop blockades, after 1 or 2 turns usually. In this case, I can park a bireme right next to the pirates to tempt them into fighting it. That will end the blockade. And theoretically I might have needed to do something similar and very expensive to protect all of my ports. As per my rules, 1 ship would be allowed to blockade any port, and the public order penalty builds and builds. As far as I know, there's no cap. I've seen it go over 100. So clearly a blockading strategy would defeat our pacifism quite easily. Luckily, the main faction AI is really random when it comes to the naval side of the campaign. Their ships just sail all over the place, doing nothing in particular, occasionally blockading you and then sailing off after 1 or 2 turns. This makes your income fluctuate quite a bit, especially as there are lots of fleets doing this, but it doesn't really matter. It never had the potentially devastating long-term consequences that could have arisen from this mechanic, similar to how regular land sieges could also just kill us at any time. We're just hoping the enemy won't be too pacifist towards us, because then we'd die easily, which means this isn't just a pacifist kill-em-all challenge, it's the pacifist but you die if you ever stop killing people, there can be only one true pacifist and I'll kill anyone who thinks otherwise, endless war is the best scenario kind of challenge. Overall, a truly credible pacifist run. Here's some peace, for example. I bribed Cyrene from Egypt, however it was very rapidly attacked before I could build new units, meaning we have mostly peasants for this defense, but 2 units of armored hoplites bring promises of great glory. Because we had so few units, I did play this one a bit differently to all of the other battles. I just blocked off the main road I thought the enemy would use. If they go around and take the capture point, we're doomed, but I thought maybe they won't, and they didn't, so that's very nice of them. They swarm us with cav and chariots, breaking the phalanx but also dying off very quickly due to the sheer stat differences. And then we have this infantry grind in which our superiority, again, will allow us to win. We even got the enemy bowmen into melee somehow, so that's all very nice. We grind down most of the enemy army. As usual though with Egypt, there is 1 unit of desert axemen scattered across the fields outside of the settlement. You can see on the minimap something's going on with them. So I need to try and go out and bring this to a close with some actual attack orders. However, the AI then gets itself together, so I quickly switch to standing still or otherwise not looking too aggressive. But maybe you can see what I was ranting about earlier. I can give move orders that will effectively give me the results of attack orders, including just running into the enemy in a non-aggressive way. So really, this no attack orders as a rule isn't the best approach for our pacifist run, because my original goal of no orders whatsoever is probably the only true route to a pacifist run. Because any order can be an attack order in principle, any move order that is, because even moving a unit into a choke point is clearly done with the intention of making the enemy fight you there, like you know there is going to be a fight as a result of the order you give to move, so that move order is a lot like an attack order. So is it really pacifist to play like this? Is it really pacifist to kill everyone in the world and take their lands? Again, these are the engaging philosophical questions we have to wrestle with over the course of this extremely pointless challenge. But yes, I think my vague instinct to continue not really giving any orders is probably correct, but as you saw there, I was quote-unquote cheating by giving move orders all the time, just sort of shuffling towards the enemy, being like, yep, I'll just stand here next to you. If you happen to kill yourself, that's your fault now. I don't know if we are entirely blameless here in this campaign. One thing I do know though is that if you live in a Greek cities run settlement, from the point of view of the civilians, from the people on the ground, your probability of being violently killed is minimized by being in a Greek cities run city. Therefore, this is the most peaceful realm in a world at war, something. We could be a lot more aggressive. I could be deploying my troops to go and do stuff. If you live in my settlements, I'll let you stay at home most of the time. Only a couple of hundred of you, only the best soldiers need to bother fighting, and most of you won't die in those fights as well. So it's all looking pretty good for the citizens of the Greek cities. That's pretty much all we can grasp at when it comes to ourselves being a peaceful utopia. Here I am grabbing something more tangible, Antioch, a nice addition to our Eastern Bloc, especially with Tarsus. And we see a clearer example of this strange lag I was talking about, where merchants move around the map during the bribe process, which removes your control for a while, but with the right camera positioning you can see that something is going on. Eventually we'll get control back again and we can easily move troops here from our nearby settlements and get it locked down. Plus, it's a good city already, so this will be an easy one to hold, despite being rather rebellious at first. More difficult to hold was Biazalora, which I already mentioned wasn't going to be ours for long, and here's why. We only have regular hoplites defending here, and the enemy have an armoured bodyguard unit. That unit comes in at the front and just kills absolutely everything, unfortunately. Their armour is high enough that regular hoplites' attack is low enough that our theoretical bonus against cavalry isn't going to save us here. Slowly but surely they can push through our phalanx, right through the big blocks, and just everything will end up dead. I think without those bodyguards, we might have been okay, as the rest of the army wasn't that good. Although I have seen regular Roman cavalry units break a phalanx here and there too. They might secretly be good. I always assume Roman cavalry are bad like equites, but technically they're a heavy cav unit, so they must be the Marian upgrade and probably have more armor stat than their models look like they should have, same as with the general's bodyguards. So that's all good / bad. We shall cleanse the taste of defeat here by killing the enemy properly over at Apollonia, where we've got elite forces to use. We may still have issues with those armoured bodyguards, but it's always going to be less so with armoured hoplites to face them. In this case, while they do charge in again, we kill the general relatively quickly and the rest will leave, so it's okay. Afterwards, we end up facing some better infantry than usual, but it's still the worst of the good infantry. It's the early legionaries and legionary cohorts. They are vaguely on par with unupgraded armoured hoplites, maybe a bit worse actually. I think we'll have the advantage essentially here. And it doesn't even really matter because it's the city streets doing the work of making the enemy units be very unproductive. We just need to avoid the enemy ever getting orders to move behind us, so they don't use their armour to break through the phalanx and cause chaos. Instead, they like to creep up on us and take millions of hits at the front of the spear wall without really pushing through. And this situation is fine even when fighting endgame units really, so we just have to praise the gods and ask for more battles like that. Here's some good news. Egypt declared war again, then begged for peace immediately again, so we get another cycle of concession where I gain Siwa west of the Nile. For absolutely no work whatsoever, all very nice, and even better, it comes with units, which is really good because the enemy have armies wandering around here, so getting reinforcements here would have been really annoying. Thank you very much to Egypt. I mean, earlier when I was taking your empire apart, I was like, well, are you even trying to stop me? Now it's like, well, you are actively trying to do something to get rid of your empire, clearly. So while the majority of the acquisitions I got in this campaign were through bribes, with Egypt in particular, most of their large empire has fallen to us through one peace deal after another, at least 2 of which occurred with no actual war attached to it. So yes, thank you very much. Here is another battle at Apollonia, I think anyway, where we face some of the proper threats now, some Praetorian cohort. This heavy infantry unit is the first we've faced with higher stats than armoured hoplites. And I actually looked up that thing I half remembered earlier about them having armor-piercing damage. I don't know if it only applies to their peeler, but maybe their sword counts as having armor-piercing damage in a stabby kind of way. I also couldn't work out or find what armor-piercing damage precisely does, but assuming it to some extent ignores your armor stat, that's bad news because most of the defense stat of an armored hoplite is in their armor, meaning their shield stat and skill stat won't be up to the job to fight the enemy here on their own. You can see I also placed my formation too sloppily, and the enemy were getting around the side, so I gave some very unpeaceful move orders to try and actively encourage violence. Pretty outrageous. But yes, you can see some of our men are actually dying in these melees. And while we haven't seen the phalanx totally broken thanks to the city street glitchiness, this is a case where the enemy have the mass and armor to totally walk through our formation and turn everything into a regular fight. If they wanted to, basically. Like, we're on the verge here of losing. We just haven't lost thanks to exploits. It's very perilous and we're clinging to the streets, essentially, to keep us alive here. We need the phalanxes to keep launching those long-range attacks over and over, so that we get in so many more attacks than the enemy get in, that the stat indifference doesn't matter so much. We'll end up still killing more of them than they can kill of us. But yes, one misclick from the AI, so to speak, could absolutely obliterate our formation here. A bit dodgy. We pray to the gods that this will just keep happening, and the good news is that, at least on this map, in this spot, this setup yields this result consistently, basically always, so we're safe to some extent. After some more bribery, I also got Salona for the second time in this campaign, but obviously it's going to be right in the middle of the Roman onslaught, so it's going to be surely contested from here on out. Then we have our next no war with Egypt, probably anyway. I didn't record most of the battles in this campaign, so I don't remember if any happened in this particular war. Like, this is just the next clip, who knows when this happened. But anyway, I ended up paying a large amount for peace here, because they didn't want to give up Sidon in the deal, probably because it's actually good. But I'm rich enough that we can effectively combine a peace treaty with a bribe to get the Egyptians to go away for a few turns and leave me, a decently developed city, in a great position. So thank you very much once again to Egypt. Like, we might actually have not made much progress at all in this campaign, but Egypt have just been like folding before us. We're taking the entire bottom quadrant of the map with minimal effort, just somehow, and of course with no attack orders being given. Here's a random clip from a time Egypt invaded Rhodes, where I noticed you can see the Colossus of Rhodes in the background. That's pretty neat. Despite being quite old by now, Rome Total War does continue to impress, and the global map as portrayed in battles is very neato. Now we jump to Tylis near the Danube to battle some Romans, where I wanted to mention a point I hinted at way earlier. There is another way to deal with the potential weakness caused by having walls. That weakness being that any army, no matter how small, can siege you out. All we need to do is hope it doesn't happen at first a couple of times, and then after that, you'll probably end up with some breaches in the walls thanks to sapping or siege weapons. Once the wall has holes in it, they'll stay there forever unless you repair them. So by simply not repairing them, the AI no longer needs a siege to attack a place, and in my experience, they will often siege it anyway until the number of holes is quite large. After that, once the defences are weak enough, I guess, the AI begins to treat it as having no walls, essentially, and will attack on the first turn. This comes with the added advantage that the AI's attack pattern is different when going through breaches versus ramming gates or capturing walls, the big difference being that the AI doesn't go up on the walls if it doesn't need to, which means if it can just walk straight to the capture point, it will never take any of your towers. Then the AI will be like, well, I'm going to attack the capture point from the other side, and walk around the edge of the city, underneath all of those towers, getting shot to pieces, and you can kill anywhere between like a few hundred and a few thousand enemies in this fashion, depending on how much the AI randomly changes direction mid-march, which tends to happen a few times each battle. Well, originally I didn't want to rely on this method of using towers to defend, even though I did try it in my experiments, because it doesn't grant any experience points, and as I ranted about before, I was hoping to train up all of these garrisons and eventually march out in some way. Since that dream is probably dead, we can just enjoy seeing the enemy fruitlessly die to our machine gun towers. Yes, another thing to note is that towers shoot faster at higher unit scales to counterbalance that, so that's well considered by the devs, although the towers only shoot normal arrows, which means against armoured units it doesn't really do anything, and I've seen Urban Cohort walk around an entire city getting shot thousands of times without taking any casualties, so they're not the strongest unless you have the ultimate super upgraded towers, which are quite rare and maybe we'll see later on. Here's me having to take a white peace with Egypt, because after I got all of their easy territory through these deals, it gets harder and harder to cheekily steal something from a pointless peace deal, but the peace is still good because I needed to break a siege on Siwa to buy more time to properly defend it. Here's a clip of the world's hardest working Roman who is experiencing a dreamlike can't run properly thing right in front of our phalanx. Probably a good thing because it's saving his life, so that's lucky. This happened pretty regularly. For some reason, attacking phalanxes is a glitch thing. Sometimes the animations don't work. Well, that's probably working in our favour. I'd rather they just stand there than actually move into the phalanx, because they might pass through it and start killing us. Here's me bribing Massacre in Anatolia, further connecting our territories in this area, and further weakening our old enemy Pontus, who are down to one region. They haven't attacked in a long time, and I think it's because I had diplomats bribing all of the units they started to amass. And of course they likely have very little population, having only one city that's been recruiting and losing units constantly. The thing I wanted to say about this though is that we're going to have to come back to this topic later, the topic of if you're just stopping the enemy from attacking you, should you do something with that? Because in this case, I'm still fully garrisoning all of the nearby towns as if I'm going to be attacked. But I'm also actively spending money to stop myself being attacked. So I'm spending money both ways here. I'm paying to defend the town and paying to not have to defend the town. That's not an ideal setup. It's the sort of setup where like kid me would be like, yeah, it's so safe, like nothing can go wrong here. And then adult me is like, you know, cursed with opportunity cost knowledge, and it's like, well, this is the worst possible way to play the game. Why is somebody forcing me to play this way? I'm not quite sure. The point is, we'll at some point have to sort out the economy. The economy's been basically fine the whole time, but to actually win this campaign, we'll need an economy that's much better than fine. We will have to actually start doing the sorts of optimizations I'm hinting at here to get more out of our economy, which is probably right now giving us about the least possible value it can, because I'm heavily defending everything, and most turns nothing happens. So I'm just spending thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands per turn, defending against non-existent attacks, and even going out of my way to spend more money to avoid being attacked. It's not that good, but along the way, I did get Frasper, as we saw there, starting a new and difficult to defend little pocket out towards the Caucasus, mainly just to annoy Parthia trying to defeat them in some way. We'll send colonists up there and see if they make it. Here is another clip from Tylis, I think, where I'm sitting back watching the enemy army just get halved in size by the towers. More clips for any of my Roman haters out there. The Romans are not having a very good time fighting us. The good news is that mostly, still at this stage, we're fighting Hastati and things like that, because we have to gradually kill off all the armies they made earlier in the campaign before they start making newer, better ones. So it's all going very well. Here's something I should have done an extremely long time ago. Take Crete. Crete is a rebel territory that's pretty decent, and it's easy to bribe. It's totally worth it, basically. And everyone, including me, had ignored it the whole time. So I finally move in and grab this place. It'll be a nice cash cow, so long as everyone else keeps ignoring it, which I think they did, if I remember correctly, which I probably don't. Well, anyway, we finally made some extremely easy progress I should have made right at the start. That was the point to make. Next we jump to a surprise moment in Sidon, where Egypt started causing me some problems. I hinted before that they can deploy Pharaoh's Guard, who have the stats to break our phalanxes, and here is the first time it happened to me. My recourse was to ask the Javcav to fire at will. I had them sitting in the back because I didn't want them to friendly fire, so I just wasn't using them. Well, in the end they don't fire, essentially, so I guess I didn't need to worry, did I? My other option here is to deploy a line of militia hoplites behind the obliterated part of the formation. But of course I had low hopes for that. If armoured hoplites can't do the job, militia certainly can't. I'm saved only by the fact that the enemy run out of morale after clearing out a nice arc of our formation, and we rout them. We would have been okay in the end here because we have so many armoured hoplites that we probably would grind our way through and win just with a bunch of casualties, but I'm used to winning with basically no casualties. So this was still a shock upturn in this campaign where nothing happened, so there you have it. I'll just have to keep an eye on those Pharaoh's Guard and make sure they don't accidentally kill me too much in the future as well. And ideally avoid cases where you have only one hoplite unit defending an approach which the enemy can beat from the front and then have nothing behind it. Yes, things have got so challenging, we might have to recruit one extra unit. That's how on the edge we are. Now here's an actual weird thing that happened, some real trouble too. This battle was at Dumatha in the bottom right hand corner of the map, and we're getting a bit owned. Firstly because they have those armoured generals who I mentioned before. They're really powerful and they absolutely can just kill armoured hoplites from the front, and militia hoplites have no chance whatsoever. They have similar stats to armoured hoplites but 2 hit points, so we'll have to sacrifice a bunch of troops to kill them, and we don't have enough. They have 2 units of general's bodyguards, say, including a faction leader I think, who has like over 100 models. Therefore we're in trouble, but that's not even the real problem in this battle, or not the interesting problem at least. The problem is that the enemy's peasants and eastern infantry are hacking their way through our hoplites. For some reason, peasants have like 1 attack, 0 defense, so they shouldn't be able to do anything in combat. I paused the game to find out what's going on, and these are no ordinary peasants as we see here. They are level 8 peasants with +2 weapons and +3 armour, meaning that despite their models, they are supposedly carrying pretty much the finest weapons and armour in the world, and they are the most experienced warriors in the world. Their pitchforks are diamond-tipped with carbon fibre shafts, their tunics are Kevlar with titanium chainmail, and they've just returned from the eternal battles in Hell for a brief chance to use their new skills on the surface, and this all adds a massive boost to their base stats, taking them from 0 to something higher than a normal unit. And they're still not quite as good as armoured hoplites, but they're so numerous that they're causing issues, and with their mass they can push through phalanxes and break up our formations too. So shout out to the legendary demon peasants of Parthia for making this battle quite the surprise, although in the results we can see it was the armoured bodyguards who killed the vast majority of our troops. The peasants just did surprisingly okay, better than the real infantry units at least. It was mainly the way they swarmed the square and obliterated our formations that caused the issues, likely amplifying the rampage of those eastern generals too. I think extremely powerful units like this only spawn through rebellions, so they probably don't have a way to make more. That's the end of that really. I can now just bribe them to go away and get the settlement back, and not much will come of it in the end really. But that was interesting, eh? Peasants and Eastern Generals only challenge run looking pretty viable and probably more interesting than this one. Over at Tylis once again there was this random moment I wanted to show where some towers have wiped out a whole column of troops just wandering around the city, but it appears the towers won't fire at this unit that's just the enemy captain, so all of the regular troops in that unit are dead and the captain is like a bonus model added onto the unit. It seems the unit is considered to not exist from the tower's point of view if everything except the captain dies. So that's good for this captain, he's going to be able to wander around here not dying, occasionally ordering his troops to continue running down this road covered in dead Roman bodies and probably getting more and more by the second. Just another pointless battle at Tylis. This will be one of those ones I mentioned where they're bringing loads of Hastati because this will be one of the armies that conquered Germania earlier in the campaign, and it's just sort of wheeling round, we'll kill them off and eventually they might make something better. Although the Germanian territories themselves will mainly be spitting out things like Auxilia in the post-Marian era, so plenty of bad units will be coming to this part of the map in particular, so Tylis is a particularly safe location. And well, the Romans aren't doing themselves any favours either by attacking or by attacking so badly. The main thing they're achieving is they're wasting my time, which of course is also the main thing I'm achieving, in that I'm wasting your time. You're watching OffiD's Game Grounds. Eventually came a very interesting development. SPQR died. Not sure why, but this means something's going on over in Rome, and this happens to coincide with a plan I've been gradually formulating to try and get Rome. So it was time to move out, clearly. I had a full stack of armoured hoplites hiding in a massive navy in the docks of Syracuse. I can now deploy this force into Italy, ready to get up to some funny business, of course, though I can't attack, so we can't do all that much out here. It is theoretically possible to take a settlement via a defensive battle if you're adjacent to it, but the stars really need to align for that to happen. We'll see my adventure into that world of strategy in a while. For now, we'll just walk towards Rome and see what happens, basically. I was determined to do something with this, and we'll see what can be done. At the same time, I was also able to take Carthage. Numidia had managed to beat Carthage in this very long war that's been going on the whole time, and I swept in right at the end to bribe the survivors over to my side. Thank you very much. It does mean I'll now be at war with Numidia, but they don't have a roster that can challenge a few units of hoplites, so we'll be absolutely fine there. We faced a battle over at Hatra against Armenia, where their army doesn't look good at all, but once again they have the dreaded Eastern armoured generals on the field. We quickly see our phalanxes broken up by this, and adding insult to injury, their ranged units somehow didn't glitch out. They simply attacked us normally. This is one of the only times this happened, surprisingly, and perhaps it was the best time of all, because I was thinking that in this fight, we lost so much of our phalanx to that cavalry attack that if there had also been an infantry push, we might have been in enormous trouble, but fortunately the enemy mostly had ranged units, so we end up just grinding against these cavalry, and while they take out like 5 of our units, we can eventually bring them down. They're not that much stronger than us. And we did also have our other wing of the formation, which was much less under pressure. You can see I had them backed up against the wall over there, ready for this area to get completely wiped out and for us to have to face a second battle over there. Fortunately, we just about win. But yes, this was a rare case where we lost half of our army to win a battle. Virtually every battle that's like this, we'll lose like 10% max. Usually it's more like 1%. You just slaughter the enemy. Here, they had both good units and the glitches weren't in our favour, so things went a little bit worse than usual. We did lack some armoured hoplites here, had some normal hoplites units on the field, so we've definitely got to shore up that front. Normally Armenia weren't a problem because I could bribe every army, but I think that one had their faction leader in it. Now though, for our big moment. When I got close to Rome, it was revealed to have rebelled. Whatever struck down the Scipii earlier also struck down SPQR, it seems, be it family deaths or just regular rebellions. And somehow, the place remained unclaimed by the other Roman factions for the 3 or so turns it took for me to get here, maybe 4. Therefore, we absolutely gloriously flash the cash, get the conversion, and can immediately secure our prize with the strongest army we have, and boom, Rome is ours. As I mentioned, to win the long campaign rules and recover from our earlier campaign defeat, we need 50 regions, but that must include Rome. So getting Rome somehow right here is absolutely essential. I have no idea how it happened, but we've got it in the bag, and of course Rome can recruit max upgraded armoured hoplites, and make us loads of money, perhaps even paying for its massive garrison now. So this is a big step forward, and of course a massive blow to the Romans. The second we took Carthage, we instantly conquered Rome as well, thus dunking on both the Roman and Carthaginian empires. Like, the Roman Empire couldn't defend their eternal city, and as for Carthage, we took your city and did what you couldn't do instantly. All without a sword drawn, quote unquote, star 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 star. This is a massive victory, but of course we might have to face some pushback for suddenly having this disconnected territory right in the Roman core. We did have a nearby issue in that the Romans are sieging Salona down. It was the first time in this campaign an enemy army had bothered to hold a siege for more than like 2 turns or so, so this is a rare event indeed, and I have no idea what makes the AI do this. But we have no particular recourse against it, that's the main issue. We can't counterattack, obviously. One thing I tried was merging all the units in the garrison, because maybe that makes it look like we're weaker or something. It's the same troop strength and same balance bar, so probably not. Fortunately, they did attack in the end. I have a pet theory on why. It was because I saved the game and reloaded in between sessions, and they attacked on the first turn of the new session, which made me wonder if the decision making is somehow dependent on like something in the RAM or certain RNG factors that can be altered by restarting the game. Well, I just got what I wanted somehow once again. Like, that's the story of this campaign, it's just working. We do lack the troops to really fight this battle very confidently because of all the siege attrition from before, so it's a bit dodgy. And I did have trouble keeping the men in formation as well. They kept trying to break and run off to die, but we do kill the enemy general early on, and the streets were doing their thing of like preventing the enemy from swarming us, so that's going to be the usual conveyor belt of death arrangement. Although the enemy are behind me, as you might notice here, this was because I didn't see them going around for the back entrance to the square, and I hadn't defended it due to lack of troops. And you saw me there doing the thing I was ranting about earlier, the offensive move order. I very clearly told the general to just stand on a spot that will cause us to be fighting that unit, and it routed right away. This is an attack order in all but name. And that's why I was saying move orders aren't really in the spirit of this campaign. I think perhaps saying you can only move to empty space should be the rule. Although you can probably still do something that forces an attack order with that as well, not quite sure. And you need leeway for when you have to tell hoplites to stand in formation when they start walking off, and you'll probably end up ordering them to stand on top of enemy units in the process of doing that. So I don't quite know. In order to be very strict, you'd have to come up with something more complex or ban movement altogether and just let units who glitch out die, essentially. That might be the ultimate solution. Although I guess you could also argue the enemy are trespassing on our territory, so if I'm just freely walking around with my sword outstretched, all of the consequences of that can be their fault, I guess, something like that. This is one for the courts to decide. I think there's some political philosophy that needs to come in here for who's really at fault for me walking my sword into you because I was just going for a stroll with my sword outstretched and you happened to be standing in the way. I was only moving. I wasn't attacking. You just got stabbed somehow. We can find a way to win our defense, surely, if we get the right jury. I'm not quite sure. Maybe we're still not quite as pacifist as I claim. One thing you might have spotted was that Nicomedia had become rebellious, and we eventually lost it. This was caused by that constantly stacking naval blockade thing I talked about, this time enacted by the Julii. I don't know why I didn't try sacrificing a bireme to stop them, but I suspect the reason was that because the AI always ended the blockade on every other occasion, I thought they would end this one at some point if I didn't do anything. But alas, we ended up losing the place to a massive rebel army. Not a huge deal, I thought, because I could bribe them back. But nay, because for unknown reasons, the bribe option doesn't appear in the diplomacy list with these guys. In fact, nothing does. I think this is the only time I've seen the no diplomacy available message. There's no general here, so it's not based on a trait or anything like that, and even when something is unbribable, it usually does give you the option to try and bribe them anyway. No idea what the problem was, but long story short, we lost Nicomedia and were simply unable to get it back because bribery and deals are both off the table with these guys. There is one more possible method I hinted at, which is what you see me starting to try over here in Italy. I'm sending a very small army to go loiter outside the gates of Capua. The theory is that if the enemy attack me and lose enough of their army to delete their garrison, probably about 80%, then the settlement will be unoccupied in the next turn and I can claim it without a battle. This is a delicate balance because I'd need to deploy a force weak enough to make the enemy attack it but strong enough to win, and well, we'll see how this goes shortly. I also noticed I can get a not massively expensive bribe on settlements north of Rome, although I need the money now so I didn't take it at the moment. Perhaps the Julii are spending massive stacks rebuilding all the armies I'm killing off camera, so they're not that rich anymore. Perhaps anyway. As for depopulation, it isn't going to happen with these guys because they have too many people. Once you've got something like 10 to 20,000 people, you are spawning more people than you can recruit per turn, so our depopulation plan won't work anymore. Evil pacifism is defeated by the they can't possibly kill us all strategy once again. Well anyway, here's me getting Byzantium from Macedon with a force that's going to come from Tylis to quickly secure it as well. This would look really good if we still had Nicomedia, but alas, it's totally depopulated, probably from Macedon fighting Rome, so we'll have to colonize it later. Now I want to move on to something truly remarkable for this campaign anyway. There is some nonsense going on with the Seleucids here near Sardis, but we'll ignore that. I think I bribed Sardis onto our side, but then they heavily contested it, and it's all very dodgy, but who cares, because over in that random place I got from Parthia, the Armenians show up to attack a force that is standing beside the settlement. That means it's time for a genuine, no-foolin' field battle, our first venture into battles outside of our settlements in this campaign. And for this one, I had a master plan that fell utterly flat on its face. Because my army is split between two groups, I activated AI control mode on the second group. Of course, my thinking here is that because that group isn't receiving orders from me, it doesn't count as a violation of the rules if the AI gives an attack order. This is highly questionable, perhaps the most questionable interpretation of the rules so far. I think it's even possible to assign units in your own army to AI control groups that act on their own. So you could skirt the rules with that, I guess, if that's in this game. I can't remember which games you can't do that in. Basically, whatever I'm doing here should be banned, and I am punished for my actions by the fact that the AI takes my troops and gets them rapidly obliterated, including one of my generals, and achieves absolutely nothing. So there you go. It's almost its own challenge, win with AI-controlled units only. I suspect playing as Rome would make that pretty viable. You saw me there doing the movement exploit attack orders, so overall this is a highly unpeaceful battle. We do win after running our troops into the enemy here and there, but we lost an officer, lost our honour, and lost some more of our short lives, so overall this whole thing leaves a bad taste. Luckily, it had no effect on anything and matters even less than everything else I've mentioned so far. So our legal defence here will just have to be a shrug. That should work. Now here's a freebie. The Romans, for some reason, left one of the regions bordering me ungarrisoned. Therefore, a few units from Tylis grab this Adrisia-like location for free. This could also be controversial in that it's kind of like an attack order to move into a free settlement, as I think the attack icon appears and it makes the attack sound, but then there's no battle and you convert it to your side instantly. Well, for the sake of progress, I think this is perfectly allowed, even though the game does say that you kill civilians as part of your occupation process. They all walked onto our outstretched swords of their own free will, Your Honour. We also grab Campus Scythiae just to the north, which was really expensive, but it has like 10k people there and some decent buildings, so we'll need this place to get some units together and defend this area against the inevitable Roman reprisals. You can see I had a couple of units wandering the steppes over there because I was hoping to grab cheeky captures like these off in the middle of nowhere and then quickly garrison them, but they'll come back to colonize the new expansion area now. I grabbed Kotais from Armenia, with no troops anywhere nearby to hold it, but I do have a colonization army ready to the south who will start marching up here. And Armenia are now down to one settlement, so we can make them into the new Pontus, where they don't cause me any more hassle, even if peace is impossible with them for whatever reason. We are chugging along here, and I currently need 12 more settlements to win, so we're in the final quarter here, folks. There is a time limit of something like 600 turns in this game, and I've used like 200, so we still have plenty of time. I think normally you'd want to be completing your campaign in fewer than 100 turns. So it's good the time limit is so extremely generous that even if you barely play the game at all, you can still make progress well ahead of the curve. Here's me grabbing a place I forget the name of from Parthia, a nice strategic gain since it's sitting on the edge of the map and we probably don't need to worry about it. Parthia now have one city right next to Seleucia in the south, and some of the massive campus territories in the north that probably don't have any people in them. So overall, we're getting them into a corner, bringing to a close the whole war in the east, since there's no longer anyone left to really challenge us here. The main problem will turn out to be getting the garrisons to the right size to control public order, thanks to those minus 80% distance from capital malices that all these places will get, and as their population goes up you get other malices as well. And of course, I refuse to move the capital still, because that would be doing something about it, even though I should, because I have way more settlements in the east than in the west, so I don't need to worry about having the capital be in the middle of the map overall. It really should be at somewhere like Cyprus or something like that. I don't know. Here's another gain. I took Bizalora again, or Bilazora, or whatever that place is called, the place that's kind of north of Macedon. I got it again. This was through an extremely rare peace treaty with the Julii, who at some point got bored of the meat grinder for a while anyway. Obviously they'll attack us again in a few turns, but still, only 10 more captures to go now. I also saw Rome attempting to finish off Macedon, which I really wanted them to do, but they broke their siege and walked off after this, unfortunately. Killing Macedon was part of our original victory condition, so that's why I liked the idea of doing it. I think Thrace might be dead, which was our other main target. You don't actually have to do the kill XYZ faction goals if you're going for a domination victory, so it doesn't actually matter, but it would have been neat to see more people die in this pacifist campaign. Let's take a look at this project over in Capua then. I eventually get the sort of battle I'm looking for, where some Brutii troops, including the city garrison, are coming out to challenge my loitering army. With no city streets to cower in, I can use a similar barrier, the Red Line of Death. Yes, it's time to camp on the edge of the map so we can't be outflanked that easily. We've even got some high ground on which to do it. Now all I need to do is hope the enemy keep running at us, and we'll die in sufficient quantities. The plan failed pretty much instantly, because the city garrison has an officer, and they retreated. If an officer escapes a battle, that whole 80% deletion rule no longer applies. So it's already over. It's a shame he routed so fast, because part of the reason this plan can even plausibly work here is that because we're fighting late game Rome, they should have lots of high morale units that will happily fight down to the last dregs, and hence get me that 80% kill rate. Unfortunately, it's very easy for them to escape if they want, because I can't order my men to chase them, outside of questionable move attack orders, which are hard to pull off on moving targets, of course. We are able to defeat the enemy handily at least, especially because, as I vaguely recall, the invisible stat bonus you get for being on high ground is extreme in this particular Total War, meaning that while we're facing like Urban Cohort, who should win even in a frontal assault, we straight up kill everything after some formation adjustments anyway, because they did outflank us a bit. In the end, you see the enemy are leaving without routing. This is an incredible ability that I think only Rome Total War's AI has, maybe Medieval 2's has it as well. They can withdraw. The AI can notice that it can't win and try to leave the battlefield, which is insanely good. I absolutely hate that future Total War titles tend not to have this option. I'm trying to remember, like, have I seen it in Rome 2? Was that a mod? I don't know. Maybe it's been somewhere else as well, but anecdotally, I think corner camping, or like sitting on the edge of the map, does actually also make the enemy withdraw more often. It's like an anti-exploit measure or something. We'll see some more withdrawing in some future battles too. For now, our Capua fishing trip has utterly failed. We'll need an army with a different composition to really pull something like this off, and we'll see me trying that in a bit. Now it's finally time, after all this ranting, to talk about a UX concern in an off-ED video. No idea how we got this far into the video without me complaining about the game, especially as Rome Total War Remastered has the big problem that its UI/UX situation is sometimes worse than the original, at least for nerds like me, and I remember being disappointed by this. So let's complain at least about this one thing. Numidia wants to be my protectorate, excellent. However, in the negotiations, the tooltip when you hover over Become Protector says that the deal is you are becoming their protectorate in exchange for paying them money. It's actually the opposite, and if you counteroffer and then change nothing, the tooltip will then explain it correctly. But yes, it's pretty scary to think like maybe you're being duped into making your whole empire a protectorate to some two-region faction in the corner because they cheekily asked for it and you misunderstood the deal. Something, unequal treaties, average US Native American colonial treaty, and so on. Fix it. Protectorate territories, by the way, count towards the victory goal, so we've just made a leap forward there, despite it being very confusing. Nice. Here's me paying big money for a terrible settlement out on the steppe, expensive only because it's coming from Rome. Hard to defend, hard to control public order, a net loss even with a tiny garrison, still a great buy because it makes Rome look bad and inches me closer to victory. Meanwhile, back at Capua, that battle from a moment ago is happening again, only this time I corner camped in the extreme, selecting the opposite corner to the city so that the route distance is as long as possible, a slight improvement on my previous plan. Generally speaking though, we got all the same problems as before. The enemy were hesitant to engage because their battle line doesn't fit here in the corner, which was making them deploy in weird ways and constantly get stuck waiting for the formation to finish arranging before they attacked. And the few units that did attack didn't have the morale I was hoping for, and they ran for it too early for my plan to be viable, at least without actually attacking the enemy, of course. And then at the end we do see another mass withdrawal. The AI gives up, and I'm so curious as to what conditions the AI sees as being impossible to win in. They've got plenty of balance bar to use, for example. Perhaps there is a failsafe in the AI code, where if it gets stuck in a loop or really can't work out any good orders, perhaps due to map edge pathfinding issues, messing with their formations and stuff, then it will just withdraw like as a last resort to avoid doing something really stupid. Or if it hasn't like killed anything in a certain amount of time, I don't know. I would love to hear from you if you happen to know how all this works, and I expect also the remaster changes things up because there is a remastered AI mode and a classic AI mode available, so they've changed something about how the battle AI works as well. That's likely having an effect. The end result is we continue to achieve absolutely nothing over here. We've killed a few Romans, and that's good I guess, and a nice picnic in the hills of Campania was a pleasant time as well, I suppose. There is a happy ending here though. I got Capua with a bribe right after this battle. I believe their faction heir was the governor, so I couldn't attempt this before, but perhaps as a result of the battles going on, he ended up leaving, so then we could attempt a bribe, and the price was quite reasonable. Basically, the same money that got me a load of nothing out on the steppe with the Julii will get me this nearly maxed out city in Italy with the Brutii. I later learned that the Brutii are extremely rich, easily the richest faction in this campaign. We'll see that later on. Probably they're not buying anything, I've just been collecting money the entire time. So this suggests that the bribe calculation is more based on overall economy size or power level, rather than pure available money in the AI's treasury. Anyway, we have expanded in Italy, secured another great territory, and sent a message that our capture of Rome is not just a flash in the pan, we are here to stay. Now here's me nearly losing a battle, which I believe was at Campus Scythii. Despite us also using Roman triumphal archers to our advantage here, we're being overwhelmed by the sheer power of Armoured General's bodyguard, plus some good infantry. We're on one of the less defensible maps, with many approaches to the capture point. And it's one where I didn't have the tried and tested stand here to make the AI break strats. So the enemy are very outrageously actually attacking us, and as mentioned, if heavy infantry bother to try against the phalanx will break pretty much right away. Which, I don't know, makes sense. That's the reason people stopped doing this in real life. It doesn't actually work against people who don't instantly die when they walk onto the spear wall, and that's a problem for us right here. There's also the mass effect coming into play, where the enemy blobs are getting right inside our blobs thanks to their numbers, and these fights are just all coming down to stats. There's no exploits, no phalanx mode, nothing special happening here. The grind isn't all that good. However, we are able to just about survive thanks to the enemy happily attacking the front of phalanxes even when they are totally exposed in the middle of the square. We eke out a victory, and we'll have to get back to work recruiting more armoured hoplites here as we clearly don't have enough. Most likely, the garrison I did have here had been sent south to Campus Getae, since that place can't make good units on its own. In fact, the next battle takes place at Campus Getae, and we won't look at that because it was fine, like all the other battles I'm not bothering to mention. Here's an interesting battle though. My new field battle bait plan is going to be tested against the final holdout of the Seleucids near Rhodes. You can probably guess my plan from this army composition. Tons of cav will be hiding around the edge of the map, ready to accidentally walk into routing enemies to get more quote-unquote kills, don't tell the gods, while the main block camps in the corner to draw the enemy far from their deployment zone. The setup went better than expected, with the cav getting into hidden positions without aggroing the enemy army, but then things failed miserably. Why? The same reason as before, really. The enemy AI has already had enough of my bullshit. It just withdraws the vast majority of its army without fighting. Now I can move to intercept their withdrawing units, but this isn't really what I needed, as withdrawing units still fight you, and I was really expecting just to finish off a few stragglers with this. So I didn't really commit to move attacking them. I did use my Javcav to kill off some of the slow-moving infantry as they withdrew, but because we're nowhere near the kill goal, and because the officers escaped as well, this doesn't really do anything. We're actually just killing people here for no reason. Again, don't tell the gods about all of this. And all of this failure comes with a cost, because I had been spending thousands a turn having this army stand outside the enemy city, and if I recall, they didn't actually sally to attack it for many turns. So this was an enormous waste of life, of money, and of course, of everybody's time. Well, there we have it. This whole, ultra rare defensive, offensive, exploit battle thing doesn't really work in this game. Meaning my grand plan from earlier, where I was going to have, gold, 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 armoured hoplites, slaughtering everything in battles like this to conquer the whole map, was probably never going to happen. And interestingly, the main reason it doesn't work is because the AI is too good. So a massive round of applause to Rome Total War for actually foiling my plan with reasonable behaviour. On the far edge of the map, we've got some bribe antics to get Campus Summarised, which I believe we went through a few rounds with, where it would go back to being a rebel territory, then I'd bribe it back onto my side, gradually building up a little group of peasants and building down their population, so that eventually public order would be fine. So we've got something going on there, a tiny bit of progress has been made. Then I struck upon the most genius idea ever, but once again the game doesn't go along with my shenanigans. The idea was that I would gift almost all my territory to a faction that already had enough territory to get me over the finish line, in exchange for making them my protectorate. That would complete the game. I thought this would hold for one turn and it would all work out, but nay, the Britons won't accept rule over half the known world, even though they could just betray me and end the protectorate part of the deal instantly, whereas I couldn't get the territories back. Don't know why they didn't take that deal. Very bad choice from the Britons, and now we have to keep playing the game. And with how stupid this challenge is, having to play the game is an increasingly cruel punishment, I assure you. On the topic, by the way, of traitorous protectorates, here is Numidia attacking us. You might remember they recently voluntarily submitted to be my protectorate, and now we're back at war with them. As I recall, they became our protectorate again after a brief war, so it was all fine in the end. Just had to prove a point, I think, there. Now, I mentioned before how economically inefficient my setup was, and this is the point. When I started doing something about that, there was this grand, 10 minutes or so, of going through all my settlements and disbanding loads of units, sending them to better garrison locations, and trying to move governors into most cities. I had something like 10 generals sitting in Sparta that had spawned over time, without me paying any attention, so I could move them here and there to make more money. The only thing I didn't really play with was the tax rates, mostly leaving everything on low, because I wanted to not care about public order, and tax changes don't matter that much if you have to spend more on units to get them. I was able to increase my income by something like 10,000 a turn overnight, which will quickly add up to me being rich enough to pull off more shenanigans, and had I done this earlier, I would have 200,000 more money right now, and probably tons more territory, and even more money than that as a result. I just couldn't be bothered to do this before. Finally, I did a thing to make us do a bit better in the campaign. Yes, I played the game for at least 10 minutes at some point towards the end of the campaign. And now, with my newfound wealth, it's time to bribe Parthia into a corner. I finally got rid of this thorn in my side in the east. This last city capture frees up the whole region from needing defensive units, so it's worth every penny and turns Parthia into a nothing faction out on the steppe with probably only 500 people or something, ending the wars against them for good. A war I didn't really show in this video for the most part, but a war that was pretty annoying. In fact, all the wars are pretty annoying in a run where by design almost every battle is exactly the same, and you ideally don't even give any inputs in the battles. I've long since forgotten why I was doing this challenge in the first place, but we're really close to winning now, so better just keep doing it anyway. The only semblance of challenge now is fighting Rome, since they can win battles if they really try. Luckily, they don't really try, thanks to City Streets, pathfinding antics, and my ultimate strike-through V formation thing I was going on about, and the armoured hoplites being just about good enough to trade okayishly, even with endgame units like Praetorians and Urban Cohort, so long as they don't rush in and just break the phalanx at least, which they did do relatively often, but never quite enough to win the battle overall. I was worried we would see genuine losses of territory to Roman endgame unit pushes, but broadly speaking, I could always out-recruit the losses, so while things went from just winning every battle easily to sometimes losing half of my army in these battles, because of the way retraining works in Rome Total War, any unit that hasn't been totally killed can be instantly brought back up to full strength in quote-unquote 0 turns, that is, it just happens instantly. So, while it only takes you 1 turn to fully replenish a mostly dead army, the enemy, well, it's going to take them 10 turns to rebuild the doom stack. So mostly, most fronts were peaceful, and when battles happened, it didn't really matter if they went really badly. And usually, the exploits works, 9 times out of 10. The enemy would glitch out, get stuck on the walls, and not very much would happen at all. So the main threat of this campaign remains to be, just that it's not especially fun to play it, so you might quit. That's probably the main challenge, to stop you actually completing it. And of course there is the threat of a war crimes tribunal once people find out that my whole pacifist way of life wasn't that pacifist after all. I can't even escape to South America in ancient times. They didn't know where they could escape to, so I sense this won't end well for me, but at least it is coming to an end, ladies and gentlemen. Let's do this then. We're moving on a bit here to a place where I've even further economized, such that I can pull 50k per turn in, and I found that if you can put together something like 60 to 70k in bribe money, you can bribe pretty much anything. For example, here we take Memphis from under the Egyptians' noses, a really high-end settlement that will be worth big money, and in the same turn I also pulled another I should have done this ages ago move by taking Cyprus much more cheaply here. At some point I bought Arminum in Italy, and I claimed earlier that I could have bribed it for 30k a million turns ago, but that was actually an army standing nearby. I totally missaw that footage. It actually costs more like 60k to get these cities, and well, we have it now, so we grabbed one. For those keeping extremely close count, we now need 1 more settlement. We could save up for another, but an opportunity for a cheekier finish arose. I noticed the Brutii have left Croton ungarrisoned this turn, and while we have nothing in range to exploit this, there is a general nearby. By extreme luck, it's not the leader or heir, given how small their faction is. It wouldn't be surprising for their leader and heir to be the only generals, removing any potential bribe opportunities for us, but we convert this guy over for a modest fee. Then we can have him walk into the city and claim it peacefully for Greece. With that, the deed is done. We got 50 regions, we got Rome, and we got the final victory conditions. The Julii might have won the short campaign, but we won the long one. And I do remember feeling happy and proud of having achieved this, but now, some weeks later, as I look back and make my commentary on all this, I can't help but think that this was a massive waste of time, and I don't remember why I was so proud to have won. It was difficult, I guess, more so as an endurance test than a test of skill or game knowledge, really. So there you have it, folks. Can you beat Rome Total War without giving any attack orders? Yes, you can, and in truth, you can often, quote-unquote, give attack orders without giving attack orders. So probably a more strict challenge is needed, but I'll not be the one to do it, for there probably are other games out there to play or something, I don't know. But I'll continue on in this video a little bit to show off a couple of random things while I'm here. First, let's look at the scores. As expected, they basically report that we're the best, and the Julii are the second best. That's the long and short of it. Interestingly, they also show the thing I mentioned earlier, that the Brutii are by far the richest faction for unknown reasons. Some combination of them never doing anything the whole campaign, and maybe cheating because they roam and get bonus money or something, might be at play, I don't know. They're obscenely rich even compared to me, who is also obscenely rich. This campaign had a very anticlimactic ending really, didn't it? Because I just got really rich and bribed my way to victory, and probably could have done so earlier, only I couldn't be bothered / wasn't paying enough attention to my expenses. So now we're going to change this with a climactic final battle. Yes, the Julii had Rome itself under siege in my final turns, so let's give them a chance to redeem themselves and kick me out of my victory conditions with this battle. And before you expect anything actually epic, I'm actually just here to talk about how pathetically this attack went, so let's take a look. The first problem the Romans will face is that we have the rare tower upgrade called something like Epic Towers, which means the defense towers have a really low rate of fire, but always get kills when they hit. So against high armor units like Praetorians, who are essentially immune to regular tower attacks, this goes really well. So the low rate of fire doesn't mean we get fewer kills because we're actually killing them with the hits. So our kill rate is extremely high, and this combines with the fact that that unit there forgot to climb the siege tower in front of them and just stood there the entire battle, and gradually were killed by infinite ballista bolts, and that's one strategy, I suppose. They're up to something there. At least the other towers they brought were successfully set up, and various units did get into the city. We have the usual hoplite street battles going on, with the majority of the enemy units getting trapped by the phalanx and choosing not to push through, so that's all good. The only real trouble we had was at this other entrance to the square, where some urban cohort did make a proper attack. They were slaying my hoplites in regular combat, and I had to bring over some spare troops to help, but the reason I even have spare troops right now is that half the enemy army is standing outside the city still. The big mistake they made was they didn't capture the gate, so none of their ultra-powerful armoured cavalry could attack us. It's weird because it's very rare for the AI to not capture the gate, and a few towers as well. I wonder if the unit which glitched outside was the one that was ordered to capture the gate, so it getting stuck on some particularly rough blades of grass or something ruined the whole plan. It's hard to say, but I think there was a real chance the Romans could have won this battle. We don't have that many troops, it's the hard map to defend, and the epic towers generally don't shoot inwards, and when they do it slowly. So running around the city madly isn't so bad. I think I really gave the Julii a genuine chance here, and they absolutely blew it. The battle ends on a timer as their infantry takes so long to kill that after more than like half an hour of melee, they're still not dead. But the timer is on our side. We'll claim this as a win. So there's a little bit more anticlimax for you. Are you enjoying the anticlimax of OVD's Gaming Grounds? Anticlimax always guaranteed. This then was the flat, miserable, pitiful end to the rule of Rome in this world. Everyone can see that Greece now reigns supreme after that battle, and somehow we've done this without ever laying siege to a city, without ever starting a fight, and almost not quite without ever deliberately going after enemies in battle, if you ignore the implications of move orders that intersect formations, and the fact I was allowing route chasing because it was too boring not to. At the very least, it was a more peaceful than most campaign where the vast majority of the world became ours because we paid local rulers to put our flags up, and the common people, broadly speaking, just accepted it. Well, after all, living in the Greek cities is pretty good, I said this earlier, because compared to the mess of conscription and total death the other factions were running, it really is pretty good to be in our faction, so it's a happy ending for most of the world, I think. I am the Philosopher King, the only responsible ruler out there, who may not have totally escaped violence as a means to our ends, but I always used it as a last resort. And at least on the scale of battles being initiated, we always made violence the enemy's decision and not ours, apart from maybe that Capua camping trip thing where perhaps we were asking for it by trespassing and stuff. But that was all a big misunderstanding, and we paid off all the offended parties already, so all's well that ends well, except for the people that died trying to pull off that failed strategy. So I think we've agreed fully now that this campaign was the greatest achievement in gaming history, and so with that, I'll have to say, thank you for watching. I don't know why I played this, but perhaps you found some enjoyment in my logs of this non-thrilling adventure. Next up, I played the new version of Dyson Sphere Program, where you have to build a factory while vast fleets of enemy invaders try to kill you. And I also decided to give myself some extremely stupid challenge conditions, because I had the dream of building a megastructure that was something other than a Dyson sphere, and a certain minor detail in the game's recent patch notes gave me a decent idea of how to do that. To find out what horrors I am subjecting myself to on my next gaming adventure, come and check that out at some point in the near future. That's it then. To world peace and hefty bribes, cheers.